Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I set up camp about 6 miles off the logging road, near a creek that feeds into Lake Winnipesaukee. It's not a marked site or anything, just a flat patch of mossy ground I'd found on a hike 2 summers back. No signal out there, no people. That was the whole point. I brought my usual gear: single-person tent, jet boil, folding saw, freeze-dried meals. Nothing fancy. I'd taken a few days off work after a rough month and needed to get off grid. Clear my head. I told my sister where I was going and when I'd be back, like always. The first night was quiet. I made camp just before sunset, got a little fire going, and ate one of those gross chicken rice pouches. Slept early. Temp dropped into the high 30s overnight, but I had my winter bag, so I was fine. Second day, I hiked a bit upriver and saw a bunch of moose prints in the mud. Big ones, fresh. That was the most exciting thing that happened. I came back around dusk, boiled water, and made dinner. It was already getting dark when I finished eating. There's this spot a little uphill from my tent with a better view of the sky, so I climbed up there with my headlamp to stargaze for a while. The air was really clear that night. I laid back on the granite and watched for satellites. Saw a few. Everything was normal. It was quiet. Not totally silent. You still had frogs down by the creek and the odd twig snap from whatever small stuff was moving around. But there was no wind. The trees weren't rustling at all. I remember checking my watch around 10:20. I was thinking I should head back down soon. Then I felt it. I didn't hear it first. I felt it. Like a low vibration, but not from the ground. It was more like it came through the air itself. Deep and heavy, but soft, if that makes sense. Like being too close to a big speaker turned way down. Not sound exactly, just pressure. I sat up. The trees were still. No breeze. But something was different. The frogs had stopped. No chirping, no movement. I turned off my headlamp to adjust my eyes. Everything looked the same at first. Sky full of stars, same ridge off to my left, creek down to the right, but the feeling didn't go away. Then I realized the stars had shifted, not moved. Disappeared. There was a chunk of sky that should have had stars in it. Not clouds, just black. A shape. At first I thought maybe I'd looked at a different part of the sky, but I could still see the Big Dipper to my right and Orion behind me. This thing, whatever it was blotting out a section straight above the trees. Maybe the size of a football field, maybe bigger. I couldn't make out the edges clearly. It didn't have a shape I could describe. Just total blackness. Even blacker than the tree line. And it was quiet. Not like before, where the woods had gone still. I mean, this thing itself was silent. It didn't hum or buzz or move, but I could feel it. Still that pressure in my chest, like standing too close to something enormous. I didn't move. I don't even think I blinked. Then it shifted. Not fast. It just drifted slightly to the left, and I knew then it wasn't a cloud or an illusion. It blocked stars as it moved and revealed others behind it, like something drifting underwater but in the sky. There was no light coming off of it, no outline. I only saw it from what it blocked, not what it gave off. I backed down the hill slow, keeping my eyes on it. I didn't run. I didn't even want to breathe hard. I don't know why. I just had this deep instinct not to draw attention. Like if it noticed me, something would happen. The walk back to my tent took maybe 2 minutes. I zipped inside and lay flat on my back with my sleeping bag over me, like a kid hiding from thunder. I turned off the headlamp and stayed still. I didn't check the time. I didn't want to look at anything that might glow. I just lay there in the dark, listening. There was nothing above me. No wind, no bugs, not even the creek. It was like the whole world had hit pause. Eventually, I don't know how long, the pressure eased up, like whatever had been up there had moved on. The frogs started again, not all at once, but little by little. Something splashed in the creek. A moth bumped into my tent wall. I stayed inside until dawn. When it got light enough to see without the lamp, I packed everything in maybe 20 minutes. Didn't make coffee, didn't eat. I bushwhacked back to the road instead of taking the trail I'd come in on. Didn't want to pass that hill again. My phone still had no signal until I got halfway down the mountain. First thing I did was call my sister. Didn't tell her anything, just said I came back early. Later that night, I checked the weather for that area. Clear skies, no clouds, no aircraft advisories. Nothing unusual. I thought maybe a military drone or some weird test, but there were no reports of anything like that in New Hampshire. No power outages, no sonic booms. I didn't see any lights. I didn't hear anything mechanical. There was just this massive thing hanging in the air above the trees, not making a sound, not doing anything, just being there. And it knew how to stay quiet. I was running a loop I've done probably 100 times. It's this forested trail system outside of Asheville, kind of tucked behind a reservoir and a little hard to find unless someone shows you. Not too touristy. Locals call it Pine Hollow. I used to go early mornings before work, but that day I went late, almost sunset, maybe 6:30. It was a Thursday, mid-October, cool and dry. Leaves were starting to drop. I remember because they made that dry skittering sound across the gravel, which always messes with your sense of someone following you. I had my phone in a waist pouch, music playing low through one earbud, and my old Fitbit strapped on like always. I don't carry a headlamp unless I'm out past 7, and I wasn't planning to go that long. The full loop is just under 5 miles. I usually knock it out in 40 minutes. First couple miles were nothing unusual. A little slower than normal, maybe. I was dragging a bit from work. Saw one other runner coming the opposite way, a tall guy in a gray hoodie. Didn't make eye contact. Just a nod. At around mile 2.5, the trail forks near a wooden signpost. Right goes toward the Lower Creek Loop, left back toward the parking lot. I took the right, like I always do. Right after the fork, I noticed my music cut out, not paused. Just dead silence. I pulled my phone out and the screen was black. Wouldn't turn on. I thought it had died, but the battery had been at 60% when I started. I stopped for a second, tried holding the power button, nothing. Figured maybe the cold had messed with it. I looked at my watch. No heart rate, no pace, just the time. 6:53 is 3. That didn't seem right. I'd started the run at 6:12. 40 minutes in and I was maybe 3 miles? The trees got thicker around that part. The sun was dipping low through the branches and everything had that washed out gray look. I kept running, a little uneasy now, and started paying more attention to my surroundings. The air felt off. I don't know how else to put it. Like it was too quiet, but also too loud in the wrong way. I could hear my footsteps, my breathing, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere off trail, but no birds, no wind, just this flat, empty sound behind everything. I rounded a bend near the creek. There's a little wooden footbridge, and that's when I realized I hadn't passed anyone in a while. No bikers, no hikers. Usually there's someone even at that hour. I slowed to a walk and checked my watch again. Still said 6:53. I stood there staring at it, waiting for the minute to tick over. It didn't. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a full minute, maybe more. I started to feel lightheaded, like I hadn't eaten enough or something. I knelt by the creek to splash water on my face. It was freezing. That part I remember clearly. It shocked me awake a bit. When I stood back up, everything looked different. Not drastically, but enough. The trees looked taller. Not just taller, denser. The footbridge was gone, like I had passed it already and didn't remember. The trail behind me didn't look the same. It curved too soon and the ground felt softer underfoot, like moss instead of gravel. I turned in a slow circle and couldn't figure out which direction I'd come from. Both sides of the trail looked unfamiliar. I picked one and started jogging again, telling myself it was just disorientation from stopping mid-run. Then I heard something behind me. Not footsteps, a kind of clicking, like two stones being tapped together. Fast, deliberate. A few seconds of it, then nothing. I turned around. No one there. I started running faster. After maybe 10 minutes, I came around another bend and finally saw something familiar. A fallen pine I always step over with a knot on one side shaped like a horseshoe. I recognized that knot. I knew I was back on the loop. I checked my watch, 6:54. Still. I stopped dead. Then, right in front of me, the watch blinked. The screen flickered, just for a second, and the time jumped to 7:08. My heart rate came back. My step count, all normal. My phone buzzed in my pouch. I pulled it out. Home screen was back, 32% battery. 2 missed calls from my wife. I didn't even check the messages. I just started running. I got back to the trailhead around 7:20. It was full dark by then, and mine was the only car in the lot. I got in and drove straight home. Later that night, I synced my Fitbit. It said I'd run 9.7 miles. I mapped the route 3 times. I couldn't find a way to stretch that loop past 5.5, even if I'd taken the wrong forks, and I know I didn't. The trees, the signs, that horseshoe knot, I remember all of it. It also logged a heart rate spike to 170 BPM around 6:54, which lasted 12 minutes before dropping back to my normal pace. I don't remember my heart pounding that hard. I don't remember anything that would have made it. The weirdest part, there's a gap in the GPS track, a full blank section between 6:54 and 7:08. No path, no location data. It just resumes like I teleported ahead. I didn't tell anyone for a few weeks. Then I tried to go back just to see. The trail fork looked different, like smaller, less steep. I remember standing there thinking, this isn't where it happened. I haven't run that loop since. It was late October, and the air had that sharp, wet smell it gets right before the first snow. Cold enough to see your breath, but not frozen yet. Me and my cousin Blake were about 5 miles off any trail, camped out in the Gallatin Range. We hike in every fall and do 3 or 4 days bow hunting for elk. Just us, no cell service, no GPS, old school. We'd set up camp near a little stream in a clearing we found a few years back. Good line of sight, and elk tracks all over the soft mud near the water. We'd seen some sign the first 2 days, but nothing fresh. Mostly we just sat in tree stands, glassed ridges, made some calls. Pretty normal. That third night, we turned in early. We'd done close to 10 miles, and Blake had tweaked his ankle a little hopping down a ravine. Nothing serious, just sore. We ate freeze-dried chili, had a nip of bourbon, and got in our bags around 9, maybe 9:30. Around midnight, I woke up to pee. The tent was quiet, no wind, moon was out, real bright through the nylon. I stepped outside barefoot, just stood there for a second, letting my eyes adjust, and I heard it. It wasn't loud, just this low, steady hum, like when a plane is way overhead but slower, deeper. It was constant, no rise or fall, but I could feel it in my chest, like it was coming up through the ground. Not painful, just dense, like standing next to a big speaker turned all the way down. My heart felt weird, like it was reacting to it. I stood there maybe 20 seconds, not moving. Then Blake unzipped the tent behind me and said, "You hear that?" I didn't answer. We just looked at each other. The hum kept going. No direction to it, just everywhere. No vibration in the air, no breeze. But I noticed the trees around the clearing were shifting, like the branches were moving. That's when I heard it, leaves rustling like wind through them. Except there was no wind. The sound was moving in a circle. I don't know how else to explain it. Not around us like a car driving by, but out there in the woods, a full loop like something was brushing past the trees in a wide ring. It wasn't fast, maybe a couple miles per hour, but it was steady. Blake whispered, "What the hell is that?" I told him I didn't know, and we both just crouched there by the tent in our socks, listening. The hum stayed low and even, and that rustling sound made its way full circle, maybe 60 or 70 feet out, and then started again like it was looping. I reached for my headlamp, but Blake grabbed my wrist and shook his head. "Don't," he mouthed. "Just listen." So we did, and it kept going. That low vibration in our chests and that wide, slow circle of sound like something invisible brushing through the branches and undergrowth. I kept trying to hear footfalls or any snapping twigs, anything solid, but there was nothing. Just the leaves. It looped 3 full times. Then it stopped. No fade. Just stopped. The hum went quiet at the same time. 1 second it was there, and then it wasn't. Total silence. Even the normal nighttime stuff, crickets, owls, whatever, was gone. We waited maybe a minute, then Blake whispered, "We need to get inside." We both climbed back in the tent, zipped it up, and lay there in our bags with our boots next to us, just in case. Neither of us said anything. A little while later, I don't know how long, I started hearing something else. Footsteps. Not walking. Just 2 steps. Then nothing. Then another. Soft, like someone in socks stepping on moss. I sat up, held my breath, listened. Another step. They weren't close. Maybe 15 or 20 feet away to the right side of the tent, but I couldn't tell how many. It could have been one person moving real slow, or more than one just taking turns. Blake was awake. I could feel him holding still across from me. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. Then, a long stretch of silence, and this weird clicking sound started, like two rocks tapping together. Same spot, 2 clicks, pause, then 3, then 4 fast ones. I reached for the hunting knife in my pack and just held it in my lap. I knew it wouldn't help if something was actually out there. It just made me feel less useless. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. But at some point, I must have drifted. I woke up with sunlight cutting through the tent fabric, and Blake was already outside, crouched by the fire pit. He looked up and said, "It's all gone." I asked him what he meant, and he pointed behind the tent. I walked over and looked. All around the edge of the clearing, the underbrush had been flattened. Not trampled like deer beds, but bent down in a perfect ring. Dead leaves, ferns, some small saplings, pressed down maybe 3 or 4 inches, like something heavy had hovered or passed just above it. The ring was maybe 70 feet in diameter, almost perfect. We packed up not long after that. Didn't even eat, just got everything back in our packs and started the long hike out. Blake didn't say much, and neither did I. That was 4 years ago. We still hunt together, but not that deep anymore. Not off trail, and never overnight. I was flying solo out of Fallon, Nevada, heading northeast toward Elko, just a little over 200 miles. I was in my '72 Piper Cherokee, which I've kept in decent shape since my dad passed it down. Good weather, no wind to speak of, early spring, still chilly up high but clear. Visibility was excellent, no storms, no turbulence. It was just after 9 p.m. when I took off, so the sky was dark but still sharp, not fully black yet. That deep blue you get right before full night. I'd made that flight more times than I can count. It's empty out there, desert and mountains. Once you're 20 minutes out, there's nothing but peaks and scrub and the occasional mining road. Not much to look at, but beautiful in its own way. About 40 minutes in, cruising steady at 6,500 feet, I leaned back, just kind of watching the sky and checking gauges. Everything was normal. Engine temp good, oil pressure good, RPMs right where they should be. I remember thinking how unusually smooth it was that night. No bouncing at all. I started to get the feeling I was being watched. That sounds dumb, I know, but that's what it felt like. Not a sound, not a shadow, just a sudden awareness that something wasn't quite private. It's hard to explain. I looked around inside the cabin first, then did a quick scan outside. Couldn't see anything, but my eyes caught on something in the upper right quadrant of the windshield, way above me. At first, I thought it was just a patch of night sky with fewer stars. But as I kept flying, I noticed that the empty patch wasn't moving the way it should. Everything else was shifting as I moved, stars rising, others fading, but that one spot stayed perfectly still. Just this slightly darker oval, maybe the size of my thumb held out at arm's length, not black exactly, just featureless, like it was soaking up light without giving any back. It had no outline, no lights, no blinking or movement, but it was there. I kept checking it between glances at the panel, just to be sure. After 10 minutes, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Whatever it was matching my speed and direction exactly. I leaned forward in my seat to get a better angle and pressed my face closer to the glass. The thing didn't move. It was like someone had punched a thumb-sized hole in the stars and just held it there above me. I radioed in just to make sure I hadn't missed something. I asked Reno Center if they had any traffic in my area, maybe a drone or high-altitude military craft. They said negative. Clear skies for 50 miles in any direction. I didn't mention what I saw. I just said I thought I had a visual on something, but it wasn't behaving like a plane. The controller told me again there was nothing on radar. That's when I decided to bank slightly, just to see if it would react. I eased into a shallow left turn, just enough to shift course by a few degrees over the next couple miles. As I did, the patch of sky shifted with me. Not immediately, it lagged by a second or two, like it had to correct. But then it slid back into that same relative position again. Same patch of stars blocked, same shape. That rattled me. Things in the sky don't just stay in one spot like that. Not without propulsion, not without noise. But this thing didn't make a sound, didn't reflect any light. It just hovered up there, keeping pace. I climbed a few hundred feet. Same thing. It adjusted after a second or two, like it was following but needed to recalibrate. I dropped altitude. Same result. Always behind me and to the right, above the wing. Always the same patch of stars gone. I opened the side vent window and stuck my hand out for a second. The air was biting cold, and I couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary over the wind. No engine whine, no rotor chop, nothing. 20, maybe 30 minutes passed like that. I kept flying, trying not to look at it too much, just checking every now and then. It never got closer, never drifted or wobbled, just hung there. Then the radio went dead. Not all at once, there was a weird popping noise, like when you're too close to a speaker with bad wiring. Then silence. I tried both comm channels, squelch adjustments, nothing. No static, no hiss, just dead silence. I reached for my phone to maybe send a text when I landed, but it wouldn't turn on. Not dead battery, just frozen. Screen lit up, but no response. The altimeter and oil temp were still working fine, so it wasn't electrical failure, just the radio and my phone. That's when I felt it. There was this weird pressure in the cabin, not like altitude pressure. I know that feeling. This was different, more like being underwater. It wasn't enough to hurt, but it made my teeth feel heavy, if that makes sense, like the air was dense, thick, and the sound changed. Not all at once, slowly. The engine tone didn't shift pitch, but it sounded muffled, like there was cotton in my ears. I tapped my headset. No difference. Everything just got dulled. I took another look at the sky, and the patch was gone. Just gone. The stars were back in that spot. Whatever had been following me was no longer there. I banked a little harder, scanned every quadrant. Nothing. No movement, just the sky. About 10 seconds later, the radio crackled back on, mid-transmission. Somebody from Reno Center asking another aircraft to confirm altimeter settings. I tried mine again, and it worked fine. I checked my phone, still locked up. It stayed that way until I landed. I flew the rest of the way with my hands clenched tight on the yoke, no music, no checking outside, just straight ahead. I landed at Elko just before midnight, taxied to the hangar, and shut everything down without saying a word to the ground crew. My ears rang for 2 days after. Not like from altitude, but deeper. I didn't report it, didn't write it up. There was nothing to explain, nothing to show. I went back out the following week. Same route, same time, clear skies, nothing unusual. But I still glance up every few minutes, just to make sure all the stars are where they're supposed to be. I was driving home late one night after visiting my brother in the small town where he lives, about 2 hours northwest of Portland. It was mid-October, a clear night, but cool, maybe low 40s. I had my dog with me, a golden retriever named Harper. She usually slept through most of the drive, but this time she was restless, pawing at the passenger seat and whining a little. About 45 minutes from my brother's place, on a stretch of Highway 26 that cuts through thick forest, I felt the car pull a little to the right. I pulled over to the shoulder, flicked on my hazards, and got out to check. Sure enough, the front right tire was low, felt almost flat. The spot I pulled over was just before a curve, surrounded by tall fir and cedar trees that pressed close to the road. It was quiet, just the faint sound of distant traffic. No wind at all. Usually these forest roads have some breeze moving through the trees. But that night, the air was completely still. As I crouched down beside the tire, I started to notice something weird about the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks in the dark, but the branches and trunks all seemed to be bending, just barely, away from something above the car. It wasn't a gust of wind. They weren't swaying or flickering back and forth. It was like they were leaning, holding themselves away from an invisible presence. Harper sat nearby, ears perked up, staring straight up too. Usually she's not that focused on trees unless there's a squirrel or something, but there was nothing there. No rustling leaves, no birds, just silence. I looked up. The sky was clear, stars all out in full, no clouds, no moonlight filtering through the canopy, just dark branches silhouetted against the stars. But I couldn't see whatever was causing the trees to bend. I tried walking around the car, shining my phone's flashlight on the tree line. The branches parted just enough to show the sky above, but there was no visible object. No aircraft, no drone, no blinking light. just an empty patch of black. The air felt thick, almost like it was pressing down. My skin prickled. Harper started whining again, pacing back and forth beside the car. I decided to call my brother just to hear a familiar voice. The call went straight to voicemail. No signal, which wasn't unusual for that area. The trees and hills sometimes killed service. I set my phone down, intending to change the tire and get out of there quickly. As I started loosening the lug nuts, I glanced up again. The tree trunks on the far side of the car, about 20 feet away, were leaning more noticeably now, almost like they were stretching upward and outward to sea, bending away from a center point above the hood of my car. I squinted into the darkness. Then I saw it. A faint shimmer, like heat rising off pavement on a summer day, except it wasn't warm. It flickered briefly, just above the car, maybe 15 feet up, but it wasn't glowing or casting any light. It was like a dark ripple, like something slightly out of place in the air. Harper growled low and stiffened beside me. I dropped the wrench and took a few steps back. The forest around us was unnervingly quiet. No crickets, no birds, no wind. Just stillness. Then my phone buzzed, an alert even though I had no signal. I checked it, but it was just a generic system message about a scheduled update. I looked back up and the trees suddenly straightened as if someone had released them. The bending stopped. The branches settled back to normal. I grabbed the wrench again and hurried to finish the tire. The whole time, Harper stayed close, not taking her eyes off the trees. By the time the spare was on, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for a while. I climbed back in, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway. Harper immediately curled up in the passenger seat, exhausted. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The trees along the shoulder were still bending slightly, even as the car moved past them. But the moment I was 100 yards down the road, they snapped back upright. I kept watching the mirror until the forest was just a dark line on the horizon. The rest of the drive was normal. Harper slept the whole way. When I got home, I checked the tire again in the daylight. No puncture, no damage. Just a little low pressure, like maybe I'd hit a soft patch of gravel. I told a couple friends about it later, and they said maybe it was just wind or my eyes playing tricks. But I know what I saw. The trees didn't move like that for any normal reason, and whatever was up there, it didn't want to be seen. I haven't gone back to that part of the highway at night since. We were up at my brother-in-law's place in Oregon. His property sits at the edge of a high, grassy bluff that looks out over a big basin, mostly trees and scrub down below, then more hills way off in the distance. The kind of view that makes your ears pop if you hike to the bottom too fast. No neighbors close by, no power lines, just sky and grass and wind. It was early September. Clear, warm, maybe low 70s. We'd gone up for the weekend, just me, my wife Lauren, her brother Josh, and our daughter Hazel. She's 6. I brought this big old Delta kite I'd had in the garage since before she was born, neon orange with a long black tail. She saw it and begged to try it out. Around 3 in the afternoon, the wind picked up just right. Not gusty, but steady, perfect for flying. So we took it out to the far side of the yard where there's a wide stretch of open space right before the drop-off. No trees, no wires, just a sharp edge and a lot of air. Josh helped me get it up. We had about 100 feet of line on a big spool, so I let it rise slow while Hazel held the handle and squealed like it was magic. Everything was totally normal for the first 10 minutes. The kite climbed easy, smooth, didn't wobble much. I showed Hazel how to work the spool, how to keep it taut. Lauren was taking pictures from the porch. Josh had grabbed a beer and was just standing behind us, watching it climb. Then it happened. It was fast, like less than a second fast. The kite, which had been floating slightly to the left in the wind, suddenly snapped sideways. Hard, like something yanked it. Not a gust, not a wobble. It jerked 40, maybe 50 degrees to the right toward a patch of clear sky. Hazel almost dropped the spool from the force of it. Then it started rising. Not drifting, rising straight up. I thought at first the string had snapped, but it was still in her hands, still taut. It didn't flutter or whip around. It just went vertical, like something had taken hold of it from above and was pulling it in direct line. I grabbed the spool from Hazel without thinking. My first instinct was to reel it in, but the string was too tight. It burned against the spindle when I tried. I had to hold it with both hands. Josh stepped up next to me. "What the hell," was all he said before we watched the kite just disappear. Not snap, not fall. It didn't catch the sun or drop behind a cloud. It was just gone. 1 second, it was a bright orange triangle in the sky, and the next, it was nothing. But the string was still there. I stood there holding this taut line going up into a completely empty sky. There weren't any planes, no birds, no clouds. Just this one thin white thread rising into nowhere. I didn't know what to do. None of us said anything for maybe 20 seconds. Hazel was gripping my leg, not saying a word, just looking up with her mouth open. Then the line started moving. Not side to side, not down. It started going up, not pulled by the wind, pulled by something else, something strong. I could feel it through the spool, this constant, deliberate tension, like whatever had the kite was climbing the string, taking it somewhere. And it kept going until I couldn't hold it anymore. The line didn't snap, it just slipped free. My hands weren't strong enough. The spool hit the dirt and rolled fast, making this loud buzzing sound as the last of the string unspooled. Then it hit the knot I'd tied at the end and just stopped. We stood around it like idiots. No one wanted to touch it. Josh finally bent down and picked it up. The string was still taut. It went up perfectly vertical into nothing. No sag, no slack. He tugged on it gently at first, then harder. It didn't budge. "I don't like this," Lauren said. We brought the spool back to the house. The line stayed tight the whole way. I thought maybe it was caught on something, but what? There was nothing above us, just sky. I tied it to the porch railing, sat with it for an hour, maybe two. The string never moved, the tension never changed. Eventually, the sun went down. Around 9, I stepped out to check it again. The string was gone. Not broken, just not there. The end of it was still tied to the railing, but the actual line itself didn't go anywhere. It just stopped about 4 inches out, like someone had cut it and taken everything else. No trace of the kite, no frayed edge, just a clean end. I spent the next morning walking the slope, thinking maybe it fell. Nothing. No string, no kite, not even a piece. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? We flew a kite and the sky ate it? We drove back home that afternoon. Hazel wouldn't talk about it. She didn't even ask for her tablet on the drive, just stared out the window the whole way. That's not like her. A few days later, I found the kite's tail in the back of the truck bed. Just the tail, perfectly intact, no string attached, no frame, no sail. Just the thin black ribbon curled like it had been pulled through the air real fast. I didn't tell Lauren, I didn't throw it out either. It's still in the garage. I don't know why I kept it. I never thought I'd be the type to do night fishing. It just wasn't something that crossed my mind until my son, Eli, asked if we could try it one summer evening at Lake Winona, about 20 minutes from our house in northern Wisconsin. I'd grown up around lakes, but mostly stuck to the daytime stuff. Canoeing, swimming, that kind of thing. Night fishing seemed a little slow. But Eli's a pretty determined kid, and I figured it'd be a good way to get out of the house together. We packed up some gear, rods, tackle box, a cooler with snacks and soda, and headed out around 8 p.m. The sky was clear, the air still warm, but carrying that cool, fresh lake smell you only get at dusk. Eli brought along his flashlight and his old dog, Rufus, a short-haired beagle mix with big ears and a tail that never stopped wagging. When we got to the lake, it was quiet except for the usual sounds. Crickets in the grass, the occasional call of a loon somewhere out on the water, and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. We picked a spot on the little dock that jutted out from the campsite, spread our gear, and cast our lines into the black water. Eli was in his element, talking about fish habits, how the water temperature affected biting, and trying to guess what kinds of bass might be lurking below. Rufus sat between us, eyes flicking from the water to the shore, occasionally letting out a soft whine or sniffing the air. I was relaxed, watching the stars come out, feeling the peacefulness you only get when you're away from city lights and noise. We didn't catch much, just a couple of small perch that we threw back. The whole thing felt pretty normal. But then, after about 20 minutes, I noticed something odd. It started with a splash. Nothing big, just a soft plop. but it came from right behind us in the water, near the dock. I turned around to look, but there was nothing there. No fish jumping, no ripples spreading out from anything visible, just the usual dark water reflecting the moon. The splash happened again about 15 minutes later. Then again 15 minutes after that. At first, I thought maybe a fish was jumping in a weird pattern or a duck or something, but Eli said he hadn't seen anything. Rufus was stiff now, ears up and alert, staring over the edge of the dock. I checked the watch on my wrist, exactly 15 minutes between splashes down to the second. The next splash came at 8:50, then 9:05:30, then 9:20:30. Eli was quiet, a little creeped out, and even Rufus let out a low growl, something I'd never heard before. The water was still otherwise. No ripples or movement except for those precise splashes. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a raccoon throwing stones in the water or an animal moving underwater, just out of sight. But nothing showed up in the flashlight beam, and no sounds came from the nearby woods. I started to pay attention to the air, to the sounds around us. There was nothing, no breeze, no insects buzzing louder or softer, no distant calls. It was like the lake had gone still, frozen in this quiet moment between splashes. After a while, Eli asked, "Dad, do you think something's watching us?" I wanted to say no, wanted to believe this was just some weird coincidence, but I couldn't lie. The feeling was real. Something was off. About 9:30, Rufus suddenly jumped up, his fur standing on end. He barked once, sharp and loud, and then ran to the end of the dock, staring straight out into the water. I shone my flashlight where he was looking, but again, nothing but blackness. Then came the splash, right behind us, precise as always. I felt a chill, the kind you don't get from the cool night air, but from something deeper. The regularity of those splashes didn't make sense. No fish I'd ever known had that kind of timing or patience. I started watching the water's surface, expecting to see something breaking it. But all I saw were tiny flickers of light from the stars and the moon reflecting off the gentle waves. "Maybe it's the lake itself," Eli said quietly. "Like it's alive." I smiled, though it was a little forced. "Maybe, kid." We stayed a little longer, but the splashes kept coming. Every 15 minutes on the dot. The last one was at 10:05:30. After that, the silence stretched on, but the unease didn't fade. Rufus stayed close, pacing between us and the shore. We packed up slowly. As I pulled the cooler off the dock, I caught a glimpse of something low and dark moving just beneath the surface a few feet from the shore, almost like a shadow. I flicked the flashlight there, but it vanished. On the way back to the car, Eli was quiet, looking over his shoulder into the woods. When we got home, I checked the lines and gear again. Nothing was out of place, no fish caught, no water disturbed beyond those splashes. I thought about calling it some kind of trick of nature, but the regularity, the silence, the way the water seemed aware, that was different. I'm not sure what we heard or why it kept happening like clockwork, but every time I think back to that night, I remember the lake holding its breath, waiting, and the splash behind us exactly every 15 minutes, like a signal only the water knew how to send. I was hiking alone that morning in the Cascades, somewhere between Snoqualmie Pass and Stevens Pass. It was late spring, maybe mid-May, and the snow was finally melting off the higher trails. The day started cool and cloudy, but there wasn't a single drop of rain in the forecast. I brought my dog, a mixed breed named Juniper. She's got this scruffy dark brown coat and sharp ears that pick up on everything. I like to get out early before the weekend crowds hit the trailheads. I left my little cabin around 7 a.m., and Juniper and I were on the trail by 7:30. The first couple of hours were pretty normal. Birds chirping, the distant rush of melting snow in the creek beside us, Juniper sniffing at everything. The trail climbed steadily through thick fir and alder. The forest was alive with spring smells, damp earth, fresh pine, and wildflowers just starting to poke through the moss. It was a little misty, light fog hanging low between the trees, but nothing that got in the way. I kept an eye on Juniper, who was bouncing around ahead of me, nose down in the dirt. She seemed distracted, like she was following something I couldn't see. After about an hour and a half, I left the main trail at a fork, aiming for a less traveled loop my friend had mentioned. It was supposed to circle around a small meadow and then reconnect further down. That's when I noticed it. Right at the edge of this clearing was a patch of ground that looked odd. It was almost perfectly circular, about 15 feet across, and then the grass inside it was flattened and darker green, like it had been trampled or pressed down somehow. Curious, I stepped off the trail and walked toward it with Juniper trailing behind. As soon as I crossed the edge of that circle, the birds stopped singing. Not gradually or quietly, just gone. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the creek's babble felt distant, muffled, like I'd suddenly slipped underwater. Juniper froze and looked up at me, ears twitching, tail lowered. She didn't bark or whine, just stared into the center of the circle. I knelt down and tried to listen. The silence was heavy. It wasn't like any quiet I'd ever experienced out here. It was like the world had switched off the sound. I stood back up and took a slow step outside the circle. Instantly, the forest noise came rushing back. The birds, the water, even the wind picking up a little. Juniper barked at a jay that flew over. I stepped back in. The silence came back just as fast. I figured maybe it was just a weird trick of the landscape or a natural phenomenon, like a pocket of air or a weird echo spot. So I pulled out my phone to record some audio. The moment I turned it on, it malfunctioned. The screen flickered, then went black for a second before coming back. I tried again. Same thing. Battery was fine, and it worked normally when I moved away from the circle. Juniper started whining quietly, circling close to my feet. I looked up and realized I wasn't alone. There were shadows at the far edge of the circle, shapes darker than the trees, but hard to make out. At first, I thought they were just big rocks or fallen logs, but then one shifted slightly. Another blinked into view. I took a few cautious steps back. The shadows seemed to ripple like smoke, but didn't really move closer or farther. I couldn't tell if they were watching me or just standing there. The silence inside the circle felt heavier now, like it was pressing down on my chest. My heart started beating faster. I called Juniper and backed out of the circle, eyes fixed on the shadows. The moment I left the patch, the sounds flooded back. I stood at the edge, catching my breath, watching the shadows fade into the forest. The rest of the hike felt strange. Juniper was tense, constantly looking over her shoulder. I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see those dark shapes again, but there was nothing. When I got back to my cabin that evening, I checked the footage on my phone. The videos I'd taken on the trail were fine, except for the clips from that clearing. They were just static, no sound, no image, just white noise. I don't know what that patch was or why everything went silent inside it, but I know I don't want to go back there alone. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was an animal. We get raccoons, the occasional stray cat, sometimes deer slipping in through the back hedges. The motion light came on at 3:13 a.m. sharp. I'd noticed the time when I glanced at my phone, half asleep. It lit up the whole yard like it always does, that cold LED flood. But when I checked the feed from the camera in the morning, there was nothing. Not just no animal, nothing at all. Just a split second of static, not even a full second, like the frame just stuttered. I live in a quiet little neighborhood outside Athens, Georgia. Not rural, but not full suburbia either. Just a spread of houses with deep backyards, some fences, some not. Mine backs up to a narrow wooded area that drops off toward a shallow creek. I've got a small shed at the back edge of the property, then a line of overgrowth and pine. It happened again the next night. Same time, 3:13 a.m. This time I was already awake because my dog, Ellis, had gotten restless around 3. He's a greyhound mix, thin as a twig, usually sleeps like the dead. But he'd paced to the back door and was standing there, stiff, ears forward. When the light came on, he backed up, didn't bark, just stared at the glass like he was waiting for something. I opened the curtain. The yard looked empty. Next morning, I checked the footage again. Same thing. The recording ran fine up until 3:13:01. Then the screen blipped to static, then it came back about 3 seconds later. No movement, no motion before or after. The camera itself is a standard outdoor model. Infrared, night vision, cloud backup, the usual stuff. Never had issues before. It had caught possums and even my neighbor's kids sneaking back in past curfew once. But this was different. It was like the whole thing just skipped. Night 3, I stayed up for it, kept all the lights off, made a pot of coffee around 2, and sat in the dark kitchen with Ellis asleep at my feet. I turned off the camera app on my phone, just wanted to see it with my own eyes this time. The yard stayed dark, still. No wind, no rustling. Then at exactly 3:13, the light came on again. Instantly. Not a flicker or a ramp up, just on. I stood and leaned toward the window. Nothing moved. I opened the door just enough to step out onto the porch. Ellis stayed inside but stood at the threshold, ears low, tail tucked. The air felt thick. I remember that. Heavy in a weird way, like the humidity had spiked, even though it had been cool and dry all day. The motion light stayed on for the full 2 minutes, then clicked off. I went back inside. Slept badly. Woke up around 7 and checked the camera feed again. Same deal. Everything fine until 3:13:01. Then static. Then normal again by 3:13:04. It happened every single night after that. Always at 3:13. Never a second off. I started setting alarms. Sat up with Ellis curled next to me, the two of us just staring out the back window like idiots. I stopped going outside when the light came on. Didn't see the point. One night, maybe night 5, there was a noise. Not loud, but sharp, like a single click or snap. The kind of sound that makes you jerk your head without even thinking. Came from the back near the shed. But when the light snapped on, the yard looked the same as always. Shed door was shut. Nothing on the ground. No movement. Ellis didn't even growl, just made this weird, low whining sound and backed into the hallway. I got a ladder the next morning and checked the shed myself. Padlock was still secure. Nothing inside had been moved. Night 6, I set up a second camera. Borrowed one from my friend Leo and stuck it on the opposite corner of the house, pointing at the yard from a different angle. It had its own power source, separate connection, totally different brand. 3:13 a.m. came. Motion light flared on. Both cameras caught the same thing. Static for 3 seconds, then back to normal. I synced the clips. The interference didn't just line up, it was frame perfect. Like something had cut them both off at the same time, despite being 2 separate systems. I don't even know how that's possible. The last night, night 7, was the only time I almost saw something. Same setup. Both cameras running. Ellis pacing, then sitting by the door again. At 3:13, the motion light flared on like clockwork, and for just a split second, less than a second, I thought I saw something in the yard. A shape. Not moving. Just there. Right in the middle of the grass. Could have been a shadow, maybe. Could have been my eyes messing with me, but it looked like a person. Or not quite a person. Taller, too thin, like it didn't belong in the shape it was in. And then it was gone. No movement, no sound. Just light, then darkness. Ellis whimpered once, then went and hid behind the couch. He didn't come out till morning. Both camera feeds that night were the same. Static at 3:13:01, clear by 3:13:04. I scrubbed back and forth through the feed so many times my eyes hurt. No sign of a figure, just static. I didn't sleep after that. The next night, nothing happened. Lights stayed off. Cameras ran fine. Same with the night after that, and the one after that. It just stopped. I haven't changed anything. Didn't update the firmware, didn't change the bulbs, didn't reposition the cameras. I still have the 3:13 a.m. alarm on my phone, but I don't get up anymore. Ellis sleeps through the night again. Yard stays dark. The only thing I did different, and I don't even know if it matters, is I moved one of the lawn chairs about a foot to the left the morning after the last light trigger. Just noticed it was sitting funny and nudged it back into place. That's it. I check the camera feed every morning. I've got the past 2 weeks archived. Not a single blip. No static. No motion triggers. Just regular quiet yard footage. All night. Every night. I haven't told anyone except Leo. He looked at the video and just kind of shrugged. Said it might have been interference from a neighbor's Wi-Fi or some weird power fluctuation. But I don't think so. The timing was too exact. And the air always felt different. Like something was just barely there. I don't know. I keep thinking about the shape I maybe saw. And the way Ellis won't go near the shed anymore. And how for exactly 7 nights, something showed up in my yard and made everything I had blink out for 3 seconds. And now it's gone. Or maybe it's not. I was heading west on I-80 through Nevada, somewhere between Winnemucca and Battle Mountain, when I first noticed the light. It was close to midnight, clear skies, no moon, and hot in that dry, stifling way the desert gets at night sometimes, like the heat doesn't know it's supposed to leave when the sun does. I'd just topped off in Elko and had another 4, maybe 5 hours until I planned to pull off and sleep in the cab. My dog, Bonnie, she's a squat little mutt with wiry brown hair and ears that don't match, was curled up in the passenger seat, dead to the world. She doesn't like the desert legs much. Gets restless. I don't usually take that route, but I had to detour south after a pileup near Boise rerouted me. I'd done most of the night stretches solo before, but something about this run had me uneasy. Could have been the heat. Could have been the way the empty highway looked stretched too long under the headlights, like it didn't want to end. About 20 minutes past a way station that was closed for the night, I caught a bright shimmer in my driver's side mirror. At first, I figured it was just a car creeping up behind me with its brights on. Happens all the time. But the thing is, it didn't pass. It didn't fall back either. Just stayed in that exact same spot, about 20 yards back and a little off to the side, right in the corner of my blind spot. I flicked on my rear cab lights and checked again. Still there. Not a pair of headlights, though, just one glowing orb. That's the only way I can describe it. White, almost bluish, and not throwing light like a headlamp would. Just glowing. I kept driving, watching it in the mirror for another couple miles, waiting for it to drift or drop away, but it didn't. It held that spot like it was tethered there. I slowed a little. It slowed too. I sped up. So did it. So did it. It never got closer, never got farther, just stayed exactly where it was. Bonnie sat up around then and started whining, low and soft, staring toward the back of the cab like she heard something I couldn't. Her ears were twitching. She growled once, real quiet, then climbed into the sleeper behind the seats and hid under my blanket. She only does that during fireworks or heavy thunderstorms. Never seen her act like that on a clear night in the middle of nowhere. I rolled down my window and leaned out, trying to get a better angle, maybe catch a glimpse of whatever was back there. But when I stuck my head out, the mirror went dark. Nothing there. Pulled it back in. The orb was back in the mirror like it never left. I switched to the passenger mirror. Nothing. Even when I jerked the wheel a little to try to see behind me at an angle, it never showed up on the other side. Only the driver's side mirror. That went on for maybe 40 minutes. Just me, the hum of the tires, the road slipping by in the dark, and this glowing ball hovering behind me like it was pacing the truck. I turned off the radio at some point. I hadn't realized it, but it had started picking up faint static, even though I was streaming from my phone. Thought it might be buffering or something, but the signal was fine. Then I noticed my GPS had frozen, just stuck at the same bend in the highway, even though I was clearly past it. I reached over and rebooted the screen. It flickered and then came back, but the little dot that marked my truck wasn't moving. It just sat there, floating on the map, like I'd stopped, even though I could see the highway sliding under me through the windshield. That's when I started feeling it, like pressure in my ears. Not painful, not exactly, but thick, like being underwater too long or climbing a mountain too fast. I swallowed and yawned, tried to pop them, but it didn't help. Bonnie let out a sharp bark from the back. I jumped. She was staring through the side netting, her eyes wide and glassy, breathing heavy like she'd just run a mile. I kept checking the mirror. The orb never moved. Around 1:10 a.m., give or take, the whole cab flickered. That's the best word I've got for it. The dashboard lights dimmed and came back. The air conditioner stuttered. My headlights pulsed just slightly, then leveled out again. It only lasted a second or two. I looked back at the mirror, and it was gone. Just like that. No movement, no fade out. It was there, and then it wasn't. I pulled off at the next rest area, which was maybe 10 minutes down the road. Didn't see a single other car the whole way. Parked in one of the truck slots under the single busted street lamp, shut the engine off, and just sat there. Bonnie crawled back up front, shaking a little, and curled into my lap, even though she hasn't done that since she was a puppy. I got out and walked a lap around the trailer. Nothing looked off. No tire issues, no loose straps, nothing on the road behind me. I even walked a little ways back up the on-ramp with a flashlight, thinking maybe there'd be a drone crashed in the brush or something. Didn't find a thing. I tried taking a picture of the mirror when I got back in, just to see if it might catch anything weird, but it was just a regular mirror again. Clean. Empty. I stayed at that rest area till morning. Couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I'd check the mirror again, just in case. Nothing. By dawn, Bonnie had calmed down enough to eat a little from her bowl. I watched the sun rise through the windshield and finally convinced myself to get moving. The GPS had unfrozen sometime around 4 a.m., and everything else seemed to be working fine. I didn't see the orb again. The rest of the haul was uneventful. I made it into Sacramento a day early, dropped the load, and headed back east on a different route. Haven't taken the I-80 night run through that part of Nevada since. I'll go 100 miles out of my way if I have to. I don't know what I saw. Maybe there's a normal explanation for it. Some kind of light reflection, or a trick of the mirrors, or a drone with weird lights. But I've been driving long haul for over 12 years, and I've never seen anything like that before. I started taking long exposure photos last spring, mostly because I couldn't sleep. My job switched to remote after the layoffs, and I was stuck alone in the house more than usual. I live a little outside Helena, Montana, about 15 minutes from town on a few acres backed up to Forest Service land. Quiet, good sky visibility, no streetlights. Perfect for shooting stars. I used a Sony A7 and a tripod I'd had since college. Nothing special. I'd go out around 11, set up in the field behind the barn, and take slow 30-second exposures of the night sky. Sometimes I stacked them to make trails. Sometimes I'd just pick the best one and mess with contrast and saturation. I'd usually be out there an hour, maybe two. The first night I noticed it was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd worked late and almost skipped it, but the sky was especially clear and I didn't want to waste it. I set up like usual, facing northeast toward the tree line. After a few warm-up shots, I noticed something weird. There was this one bright point just above the horizon that stayed exactly where it was. In the photos, every other star would streak a little, depending on exposure time or rotation, but this one didn't move at all. Not even a pixel. At first, I figured it was a planet, Venus, maybe, or a plane way out heading straight toward me. But it wasn't blinking, and it didn't grow or fade, just stayed perfectly fixed. I took another photo, then another, longer one, same result. Everything else had a faint motion blur, and this one dot stayed crisp and still. After 10 minutes of testing, I zoomed in digitally. It didn't look like anything, just a sharp white point. No color fringing, no lens artifact. I tried walking a few steps left and right to see if it shifted against the stars, parallax, or whatever. It didn't. It just stayed locked in that same spot. Eventually, I got cold and packed up. I told myself it was probably a satellite or something geostationary, even though I didn't think those were supposed to be visible like that. I didn't post the photos or tell anyone, just felt off. Next night, I checked again, same time, same place, and there it was, same spot in the sky. Still not blinking, still not moving. I pulled up a star map app on my phone and pointed it at the sky. The app showed stars, planets, even a satellite cluster, but not that point. It acted like nothing was there. I watched it for maybe 20 minutes. Didn't take pictures this time. I just stood in the grass with my hands in my coat pockets, staring at this one little dot that didn't behave like anything else up there. Then something happened I can't explain. It blinked out. Not slowly, just gone, like someone flipped a switch. I thought maybe I'd blinked or looked away for a second, but I stayed there another half hour and it didn't come back. Nothing moved, nothing filled its place, just regular sky again. I went inside and checked the weather. No clouds, no atmospheric weirdness, nothing unusual on the radar. The next few nights it didn't come back. Then Sunday, I saw it again, but this time it was higher up, maybe 20 degrees west of where it had been. Same appearance, same behavior, a fixed point, bright, not blinking. Stayed perfectly still while everything else drifted. I took a sequence of 5 shots over 15 minutes. I overlaid them in Photoshop. Every star showed trails. That one dot didn't. I don't know why, but it started to make me feel uneasy. Like it wasn't just something out there, like it was watching me. I know how that sounds, but it was this weird sense of attention. I'd be standing still in the yard and it felt like I was being studied. I stopped going out for a while. 2 weeks passed. Weather turned. Then one night, I had trouble sleeping again and decided to take the dog out. Clover, my shepherd mix. She usually just sniffs around and comes right back in, but that night she froze halfway off the porch. Ears up, tail rigid, just staring into the dark toward the back field. I followed her gaze and it was there again. Same white point, high and still. I crouched next to her. She didn't growl or bark, just watched, tense. Then she let out this low whine, backed up to the door, and started pawing at it like she'd had enough. I brought her in and locked the door, went upstairs and watched from the bedroom window for over an hour. It never moved. Around 2 a.m. it disappeared again. Same way, just blinked out. I kept looking even after that. Not every night, but often. I tried not to make it a thing, but it had started to get in my head. I'd find myself checking the sky reflexively, even during the day. I downloaded satellite tracking apps, tried to line things up, but nothing matched that dot. It didn't follow any path. It didn't appear on any charts. One night in late May, I was out past midnight. No tripod this time. I just stood up out back with a mug of tea, watching. It was windy and the pine branches were swaying, but the sky was cloudless. Moon was low, and there were 2 of them. Same brightness, same size. One in the usual spot east, and a second one off to the south, near the treetops. Identical behavior. No movement, no flicker. I don't know why, but seeing 2 made it worse. Like they weren't just some weird phenomenon, they were coordinated, intentional. I stayed for maybe 10 minutes, then went back inside, pulled all the curtains, didn't sleep. After that, I started noticing a few other things. Lights in the woods, not high up, low, down in the trees, faint, like lanterns or flashlights, but with a bluish hue. They'd appear for a few seconds, then fade. Never in the same place twice. Clover started refusing to go outside at night. She'd sit at the door and whimper. I had to start taking her out earlier, before dusk. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard what I thought was someone walking in the gravel outside the barn. Just 3 or 4 slow crunches, then silence. I waited at the window with a flashlight, but never saw anything. I don't think anyone was out there. I think it was something else. The last time I saw the fixed star was mid-June. It was higher up than before. I took one photo, handheld, and then stopped. It felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to look anymore. That night, the power flickered 3 times. No storms, no wind, just blinked out, came back, blinked again. My phone froze, couldn't get it to unlock for almost 10 minutes. I stayed on the couch with all the lights on. Haven't seen it since. I still check sometimes. I'll glance out the kitchen window or step onto the porch when it's clear. Nothing's there. But I don't take photos anymore. I was closing up the shop late one Thursday night when the phone rang. It was Heather, one of the regulars, calling to say her car had been making this weird rattling noise since that morning, and she wanted me to check it out before heading to her parents' place out in the sticks. I told her I could swing by after closing. The shop wasn't far from her house, maybe a 15-minute drive, mostly through some old suburban streets that get quiet after dark. I finished cleaning my tools, locked up, and grabbed the keys for her car from the counter. It was a silver Honda Civic, nothing special but solid. Heather mentioned it was acting up mostly at low speeds, so I figured a test drive would be the best way to spot the problem. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I pulled out onto the street. The air was cool, typical early fall night in Cleveland, damp with a faint smell of wet leaves. Heather's neighborhood was mostly quiet, and streetlights spaced a bit far apart, casting these pools of yellow-orange light on the road. I took it slow, scanning for anything weird under the hood or in the steering. That's when I noticed the first streetlight flicker off. I was just about to pass it, and then it blinked out like someone flipped a switch. It went completely dark for maybe a second, then flickered back on as soon as I rolled past. I shook my head, thinking maybe a faulty bulb or some wiring issue. No big deal. A few blocks down, the same thing happened again. Another streetlight flickered off just as I approached and came back on right after I passed under it. I started paying more attention now, glancing up every few seconds. It happened again, then again, Every single streetlight I passed did the same thing. I slowed the car, tapping the brakes a little more carefully. The rattling Heather mentioned was faint, but I could hear it if I listened close. I kept my eyes on the streetlights. They all flickered off for the same brief moment, almost like the car was triggering them somehow. It was a strange feeling, like the whole neighborhood was reacting to me driving through it, but obviously that couldn't be right. The road was mostly empty. No other cars, no pedestrians, just me and the flickering lights. At one point, I glanced at the dashboard, and the radio started cutting in and out with static. I fiddled with the dial, but it didn't help. The static seemed to get louder whenever I was near the flickering lights. I tried calling Heather to let her know I was on my way, but the signal dropped mid-call. The phone showed no bars. I looked up, and the next streetlight was flickering off again, just like before. I pulled over for a second and stepped out of the car. The night was still, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. I stared up at the streetlight that had just turned off. It was just an ordinary light, nothing fancy, but it felt like the dark coming from it was heavier than usual. I walked under it, waiting for it to turn back on. It did, after a moment, casting that familiar warm glow. I stood there, thinking maybe it was some electrical issue with the neighborhood grid, but it was odd how perfectly timed it was with my movements. Back in the car, I started driving again, slower this time, watching the lights like a hawk. They flickered off and on as usual, but then, right after passing a light, the car's engine sputtered, it shuddered and almost stalled. I gave it a quick rev and it smoothed out, but the rattling was louder now. That's when I noticed something else. The shadows under the trees lining the street weren't acting right. They moved, or more like shifted slightly, as if something was slipping in and out of sight. I caught a glimpse of what looked like a figure, maybe a person, just at the edge of one shadow. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself I was just tired, maybe imagining things. The rattling got worse the farther I went. I was nearing Heather's place, a small house on a quiet cul-de-sac surrounded by thick woods. The streetlights here were spaced out more, and the darkness between them felt deeper. As I approached the last streetlight before her house, it flickered off again. This time, it didn't come back on right away. I stopped the car, looking around. The quiet was absolute. Even the usual night sounds seemed muted. The engine idled roughly, and the rattling felt like it was coming from under the dashboard now. I reached down to check the fuse box when I noticed the headlights flicker. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a faint glow behind the trees, just beyond the end of the street. It wasn't bright, more like a pulsing light, subtle and slow, almost like it was breathing. I looked closer, trying to figure out what it was, but it disappeared as soon as I focused. My heart started beating faster, and the air inside the car felt colder than before. I pulled into Heather's driveway and cut the engine. The streetlight finally blinked back on. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of everything. The rattling stopped as soon as the engine was off. Heather's house was dark. I left a note on the windshield about the noise and that I'd take another look tomorrow with some fresh parts. I locked the car and walked to my truck parked down the street. As I was leaving, I glanced back toward the woods. That faint glow was there again, just a little deeper in the trees this time. No sound, no movement, just that slow, steady pulse. I got home a little after midnight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. The next day, I inspected Heather's car with more care, found a worn belt that could explain the noise, and replaced it. But the streetlights, they were fine. No flickering. I drove the same route during the day, lights steady on. Nothing unusual. I tried not to think about the glow or the flickering lights after that. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, especially on quiet streets with those old street lamps, I swear the lights dim, just as I get close. And sometimes, if I glance off into the shadows, I catch that same slow, pulsing light, barely there, watching from somewhere just out of sight. I was working the overnight shift at the weather center in Duluth. It was mid-October, the kind of cold that's just starting to sink in. The sky mostly clear, with a hint of frost on the ground when I came in around 10 p.m. The whole building was quiet except for the hum of computers and the soft tapping of keyboards. My job was mostly routine, watching radar and satellite data, updating forecasts, and calling in alerts if anything unusual popped up. That night, everything seemed normal for a while. There was some leftover cloud cover over Lake Superior, but no big storms moving in or out. Around midnight, I pulled up the radar loop for the northwest quadrant near the Iron Range. That's when I noticed it, a single cloud cell hovering in place, just off the shore, over some of the forests and lakes. I figured it was probably just a glitch or an artifact. Those systems sometimes throw up weird spots that don't really exist. But then I looked again an hour later, still there. Not drifting, not changing shape, just sitting perfectly still in the exact same spot. I moved the radar forward. 2 hours, 3 hours. The cloud was still there, a perfect disk, maybe about 3 miles across. No motion, no spreading, no sign of forming or dissipating. I double-checked the wind data. Nothing. The wind speeds were near zero across the entire region. No nearby storms to feed or push this thing along. I looked at satellite images, no obvious explanation. It was just there. The shape was strange, too. It wasn't fluffy like the other clouds around it, more like a smooth, flat disk with sharp edges, which made no sense for natural cloud formations. Usually, clouds look jagged or fuzzy on the edges. This one was too clean, too perfect. I zoomed in on thermal data. The temperature of that cloud cell was slightly cooler than the surrounding air, which was odd but not unheard of. Still, no lightning, no precipitation, nothing. I called my supervisor, Karen, to take a look. She stared at the screen for a good 10 minutes, quiet, then said it was weird, but probably a technical glitch. I was skeptical, but I went back to monitoring. After a while, I got up to stretch and grab a coffee from the break room. When I came back, the cloud was still there. The quiet hum of the computers, the dim glow from the monitors, everything felt oddly tense, like something was just out of place. Around 3 a.m., I started feeling a little uneasy. I don't know how to explain it. The cloud looked like it was watching. Not a person, obviously, but there was something off about it, as if it didn't belong in the natural sky. I ran some diagnostics on the radar and satellite systems. Everything checked out fine. No maintenance or updates were happening overnight. No interference that might cause a false image. The disk didn't change or move, but sometimes it seemed to pulse very faintly, like a subtle brightness shift every few minutes. I noticed that when I looked away and then back, the edges looked sharper, almost glowing for a second. I tried calling another meteorologist on the East Coast, Jeff, to see if their data showed anything similar. He checked and said no, their radar didn't pick it up, which made sense. It was localized. That morning, I was due to hand off the shift, but I stayed a little longer, watching the cloud. By the time the new shift came on, it was still there, exactly where it had been since midnight. I told them to keep an eye on it. Later, Karen told me the satellite company said there was no interference or known anomalies in the data. She said if it stayed longer than a few more hours, they might send a plane out to check it visually. I left work just before sunrise, the sky clear except for that strange disk hanging silently miles above the earth. The weird thing was, on the drive home, the cloud was visible against the lightening sky. I stopped a few times to look out over the lake and the trees. It was unnerving how still it stayed, like it was ignoring all the wind and weather around it. At home, my dog, a border collie mix named Juno, wouldn't stop staring out the window that morning. She was twitchy, which she usually isn't. I tried to distract her with walks and toys, but she kept looking back at the sky. The clouds stayed there for most of the day. The radar finally showed it breaking up late in the afternoon, like it was slowly dissolving from the edges inward. By evening, it was gone. I checked the data the next day and the day after. Nothing else like it anywhere else. I still look up sometimes, wondering if it was just a weird weather fluke or something else entirely. Something that didn't quite fit with how clouds or anything natural behave. That cloud never made sense to me. I want to start with the night it all began, because that's when things got weird and I still can't explain what happened. I'm Dan, and I live in a pretty average 2-story house out in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy, just enough yard for my dog, Rufio, a tough little terrier mix who's been my sidekick for 5 years. Rufio's usually fearless. Loud noises don't faze him, and he loves exploring every inch of the yard or checking out the neighborhood. But that night, he changed. It was a Tuesday, late spring. I'd been working late and finally got home around 11:30 p.m. The house was quiet, except for the usual hum of the fridge and the sound of the air conditioner kicking on and off. Rufio met me at the door, tail wagging, all normal. I grabbed a beer, sat down on the couch, and turned on the TV. About 15 minutes in, there was this sudden, low hum. Not like anything I'd heard before, kind of like the whole house vibrating quietly, but deep and steady. It lasted maybe 10 seconds and then just stopped. Rufio froze immediately. He went rigid, ears flat, and bolted straight for the basement door. Usually, he hates the basement. Dark, cold, and kind of musty. But that night, he scrambled down the steps and vanished into the shadows below. I followed, thinking maybe he'd found a mouse or something. But when I got down there, he was just standing by the furnace, staring at the wall like something was there that I couldn't see. I called him a few times, tried to coax him out with treats, but he just stayed put. The next morning, I found him still down there, like he'd been sleeping on the cold concrete all night. I was annoyed and a little worried. Usually, Rufio's bouncing around by 7 a.m., ready to go for a walk. This time, he didn't even come upstairs until mid-afternoon. I thought maybe he'd hurt himself or was sick, but no. He ate, drank water, and seemed physically fine, just weirdly withdrawn. That went on for days. Every time I tried to get him upstairs, he'd growl softly and back away, always returning to that same spot by the furnace. I checked the basement over and over. No signs of rodents, no strange smells, no drafts, nothing that might explain why he was so fixated down there. Meanwhile, things around the house started to feel off to me too. Lights would flicker occasionally, like the bulbs were about to burn out. I chalked it up to the old wiring, but the timing was strange, always around the same late-night hours when the hum happened. One night, about 3 days after that first hum, I was downstairs doing laundry when I heard it again. That same deep, low humming sound, but this time it felt louder, almost pressing against my chest. Rufio barked once, low and uneasy, then bolted back to his spot near the furnace. I looked up at the ceiling, thinking maybe some machine upstairs was acting up, but everything was quiet. Then I noticed the air felt different, like the basement was thicker, heavier somehow. My skin prickled, and I felt a dull headache start behind my eyes. I stepped outside for some fresh air and called Rufio up with me. He hesitated, whining softly, then slowly climbed the stairs, staying close to me. Over the next few days, I started noticing odd things in the basement. Faint scorch marks on the floor near the furnace, small patches where the paint was bubbling. I blamed moisture or maybe a faulty heater, but the repairs the technician didn't find any real cause. The strange hum kept coming every few nights, always around midnight, lasting about 10 to 15 seconds, never more. I tried recording it on my phone, but every time I played it back, the sound was barely there, like static or a low buzz, nothing like what I actually heard. Rufio's behavior stayed weird. He wouldn't come out except when I was down there, and even then, he was on edge, ears twitching and eyes darting to the corners like he was watching something invisible. One morning, I woke up to find the basement door wide open. I'm sure I'd closed it the night before. Rufio was nowhere in sight. I called him, searched the house top to bottom. After half an hour, I found him back in the basement, sitting perfectly still by the furnace, staring at the wall. I sat with him for a while, trying to calm him, and that's when I saw it. In the dim light, there was this faint, almost translucent shimmer on the wall, like a heat wave or a thin veil moving slowly. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was my imagination, maybe a trick of the light or shadows from the pipes, but Rufio stayed fixated there, unblinking, not even reacting when I crouched next to him. The basement was colder than usual that day, but no drafts. I started keeping a log of when the hum happened and any changes in Rufio's behavior. The intervals weren't regular, but hovered between 2 to 3 nights apart. One night, after the hum, I noticed something else. My phone was acting weird. The screen dimmed on its own, apps crashed, and the GPS showed I was in a location that didn't exist on any map I checked later. The next morning, I found a strange scratch on the basement wall near the furnace, like something sharp had scraped it in a curved line. It didn't match any tool I had. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched kept growing. I stopped sleeping well, waking up in the middle of the night to check on Rufio, who was now lying just outside the basement door instead of down there. Then came the night I was in bed and heard something moving in the basement. Not a normal sound like pipes or creaks, but slow, deliberate footsteps. I froze, heart pounding. I called Rufio, and he didn't bark or run down to investigate. He stayed at my feet, shaking. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and crept downstairs. The basement was pitch black except for the faint glow of the furnace pilot light. No signs of anyone or anything, but the hum started again, low and deep, filling the room. I felt the air press on my skin, like a weight. Then it stopped. I waited, breathing hard, but everything was silent. I went back upstairs and locked the basement door. After that, Rufio slowly started coming upstairs again. The hum stopped for almost a week. I thought maybe it was over, but the basement door was open the morning I left for work. I found another scratch, this one deeper and more jagged. No prints, no signs of forced entry. I started keeping the lights on down there and installed a camera. The footage was mostly normal. Rufio wandering the basement, nothing unusual. But one night, the camera caught a faint glow in the corner of the frame. It wasn't a reflection or lens flare, just a soft, shifting light, almost like a ripple. Rufio didn't react, but I felt cold looking at the playback. I unplugged the camera. I haven't slept much since. Rufio's back to his old self mostly, but he still won't go near that spot by the furnace for more than a few seconds. I'm not sure what's in the basement or what that hum means. I just know something changed that night. And sometimes when the house is quiet, I swear I can hear that low vibration again, barely there, like a distant pulse. But when I go down to check, it's just the empty basement, waiting. I was on a red-eye flight from Seattle to Minneapolis, stuck in the middle seat between a guy who fell asleep snoring softly and a woman quietly tapping away on her laptop. The cabin lights were dimmed, most people trying to catch whatever sleep they could before morning. I wasn't tired, so I kept my window shade cracked just a bit to glance outside. We'd been flying for a couple hours, cruising above a thick layer of clouds that looked like a soft gray blanket stretched across the night sky. The moon wasn't out, so it was just blackness above and that endless white sheet below. The only light was from the little overhead signs and the occasional blinking of the seatbelt icon. Suddenly, I caught something through the small window. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the clouds or the plane's wing moving against the light. But no, it wasn't part of the plane. Far below, somewhere beneath those clouds, I saw a faint outline moving. It wasn't lit up, no blinking lights, no glow. Just a shape pacing along, almost as if it was walking or gliding on the surface of the cloud layer. I blinked a couple times, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a shadow of the plane itself. But the shape was definitely separate. It moved steadily in a straight line, then paused, and then kept going. No sound, of course. The plane's engines drowned everything out up here. I nudged the guy beside me, whispered, "Hey, do you see that down there?" He mumbled something unintelligible and turned away. I glanced over at the woman next to me, but she was focused on her screen, headphones on, so I just kept watching. The shape was pale, like a soft silhouette, maybe 20 feet long, hard to tell scale at that distance. It reminded me of something walking upright, but stretched out to me like a weird shadow figure pacing quietly in the dark. We were flying fast, so the shape moved steadily but didn't vanish behind the clouds like I thought it would. Instead, it stayed just below us, pacing in a straight line as if it knew we were there. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it showed up, it slipped under the edge of the cloud cover and disappeared. I stared out, half expecting it to pop back up or for something else to appear, but nothing. I kept my eye on the clouds after that, but it was just normal night sky again. No lights, no shapes. I felt my heart pick up a little, but I wasn't scared exactly, just weirded out. Like, what was that? How had I seen it so clearly when no one else did? Maybe I was just tired and my mind played tricks on me. After a while, the flight attendant came by with water and snacks. I asked her if anyone reported seeing anything outside. She gave me a polite smile and said no, nothing unusual. The rest of the flight passed without incident, and we landed early morning. I packed up and walked off the plane, feeling like I'd just seen something no one else noticed. Later, I asked a few friends about it, describing the shape and how it moved. No one had any idea what I was talking about. It wasn't a plane or helicopter because there were no lights and no sound from that distance. It wasn't a bird or a weather balloon. I'm not sure if I was just lucky to see something real or if my mind stitched together random shadows and light in a weird way. I still wonder if anyone else on that flight saw it, but no one said a word. Sometimes when I fly at night now, I glance down, half hoping to catch a glimpse of that pacing shape again, but it never comes back. I was out near Dry Creek Canyon, flying my drone on a late afternoon when things started feeling off. I go out there a lot, mostly for the quiet and the views. I'm no professional or anything, just a guy who likes to tinker with my drone and shoot videos of the landscape. My name's Ethan, by the way, and I live just a couple miles from the canyon's edge. I usually head out there whenever the weather's clear, like it was that day. Dry, about 78 degrees, a gentle breeze rustling the scrub oaks. I had my usual gear with me, my Phantom 4 Pro, a backpack with batteries, some water, and my dog, a mutt named Bramble. She's got this thick reddish coat, sort of scruffy but smart as hell. Bramble always tags along. She's calm most of the time, but gets curious when we're near the cliffs or anything unusual. The drone was hovering above a cluster of jagged rocks, the sunlight hitting the edges just right. I was capturing footage to stitch into a little video for my Instagram. Nothing fancy. But then, as I was scanning the live feed, I noticed something weird on the drone's screen. About 500 feet below, nestled between two rock outcrops, was a perfectly smooth circular depression carved right into the stone. It looked like someone had taken a giant metal bowl and pressed it into the canyon floor. What made it strange was that I was pretty sure it hadn't been there the last time I checked satellite images. I'd looked just a day or two earlier to plan my flight path, and nothing like that showed up. Satellite images can be grainy sometimes, but this depression was about 30 feet across, big enough to show up easily. I zoomed the camera in as close as I could, trying to get a better look. The edges were razor sharp, like the stone had been ground down. No cracks, no rubble around it, nothing. The surface inside the depression was flat and totally smooth, unlike the rough canyon floor around it. I felt a little jolt of unease. I mean, it was just a hole in the rock, right? But the thing was so out of place. There was no natural reason for something like that to be there. Not in Dry Creek Canyon, which is mostly old granite and sandstone, carved by water and wind over millions of years. I decided to land the drone and hike down closer. Bramble trotted ahead, sniffing at the bushes. The trail down into that part of the canyon was rough but manageable, mostly loose gravel and dry brush. The sun was dipping low now, shadows stretching over the rocks. There was a quiet weight in the air, like the whole place was holding its breath. As I got closer, I noticed that the air felt different, thicker, maybe? Not humid, but heavier. Bramble stopped and stared at the depression, ears perked, growling softly. I waved her off, but she stayed tense, refusing to come nearer. I stepped up to the edge and looked down into the depression. The stone was so smooth it almost reflected light like glass, but it wasn't wet or shiny, just polished perfectly. The edges formed a perfect circle, maybe 28 feet in diameter, and the depression was about 3 feet deep. There were no tool marks or signs of machinery, no tracks around it, and no debris inside. The rock surface outside the depression was rough and weathered, but the circular area was pristine, like it had been untouched for years. Except the thing was new, or so it seemed. I circled around it, trying to spot anything unusual. I pulled out my phone to take some pictures, but the screen flickered and glitched as soon as I aimed at the depression. Weird, right? Like some kind of interference. That's when I noticed something else. The shadows around the depression didn't match the sun. The rest of the canyon was bathed in warm, fading light, But inside the circle, it was like the light bent weirdly, casting no shadow at all. It was faint but noticeable, like the area inside the depression absorbed light instead of reflecting it. I felt a cold spike in my chest, like I'd just stepped into a different place, even though I was standing right there on the rock. I didn't want to hang around too long. I backed away, and as I did, the air pressure seemed to shift again, the heaviness fading. Bramble relaxed a little and started sniffing the brush again. On the way back up, I kept checking the sky. It was starting to turn pink and orange with the sunset. Nothing unusual there, just birds circling high above and the wind picking up. But I felt watched. Not by a person, but like something was observing from the shadows. Back at the car, I tried to review the footage and photos on my phone, but all images of the depression were corrupted. The files wouldn't open or just showed static. Everything else from the flight was fine. Trees, cliffs, bramble running, but nothing from the circle. The next morning, I went back early, hoping to get a better look in daylight. When I reached the spot, the depression was gone. The rocks looked exactly like they always had. Rough, cracked, weathered. No circle, no smooth surface, nothing. I double-checked the satellite images from that morning and the day before. Both showed the usual terrain, no sign of any depression. I tried to chalk it up to some trick of light or a glitch in the drone's camera. But the way Bramble reacted, the weird air shift, the light behaving oddly, none of it made sense. I didn't tell many people. I figured no one would believe me. I did email the drone footage to a friend who's a tech guy, but even he couldn't explain the corruption in the files or why the images of that spot were unusable. Since then, I've gone back to Dry Creek Canyon a few times. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched when I'm near that spot. Bramble stays close and won't wander far. I still think about that smooth, perfect circle in the rock, how it appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as fast. I don't know what it was. Maybe some kind of natural formation I've never heard of. Or maybe something else entirely. All I know is that it was there, and it wasn't supposed to be. The power went out just after 9:30 p.m., right in the middle of the dinner hour, and it wasn't the usual kind of outage. I'm not talking about the flicker and then the lights coming back on in a minute or two. This was a full blackout that swallowed the whole neighborhood and the whole town for that matter. I live out in Maple Hollow, a sleepy cluster of houses on the edge of the Missouri Ozarks, so when the lights go, you notice. It gets really dark real quick, with no streetlights or porch bulbs to break the black. I was sitting on my porch with my dog, Scout, a lean black lab with a white patch on his chest. He was calm, which was weird because he usually gets jumpy the moment the power dips. We'd been watching the weather radar on my phone when the screen just went blank. At first, I thought it was the phone acting up, but then I noticed Scout staring up at the sky, ears perked, tail stiff. That's when I heard it. A low, humming sound like metal grinding slowly. It was steady, a kind of whir that didn't change pitch or fade. It wasn't mechanical, not like a generator or car engine. It sounded wrong, almost too smooth and constant. I looked up, but the sky was thick with clouds, so I couldn't see much. Then my phone went dead. No signal, no Wi-Fi, nothing. I tried calling my wife, Clara, but the calls didn't go through. The whole neighborhood was dead silent, except for that strange whirring. It was coming from all around, like the sound was everywhere at once. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the street. I could see a few neighbors stepping outside their houses holding candles or flashlights, faces lit up with confusion and concern. No one said anything at first, just listening to that noise and trying to peer into the darkness above us. We live near a patch of woods, and behind that is a big hill. I thought maybe there was some kind of equipment on the hill making the noise, like a new cell tower or construction, but I knew nothing had been built recently, and the signal blackout was weird. Usually a tower would mean more signal, not none. One of the neighbors, an older guy named Hank, pointed to the sky and whispered, "You see that? You see that?" I looked where he was pointing and caught a faint glow between the clouds, kind of like a dim, pulsing light. It wasn't a steady glow like a plane or helicopter. It flickered on and off in uneven intervals, almost like a heartbeat. Scout growled low in his throat, looking tense. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We all just stood there, the group growing, drawn outside by the blackout and that sound. Minutes passed, and the whirring didn't change. No crackle of radios, no sirens, no chatter from any emergency channels. My car wouldn't start when I tried the keys. The whole area was locked in this quiet, apart from the strange noise. Suddenly, the glow in the sky changed. It stretched out, becoming a line of lights moving slowly but silently above the tree line. They weren't blinking like aircraft lights. No red, no green, just white, dull, and unblinking. The formation seemed too precise, like they were keeping perfect spacing, moving as one. People started whispering, some pulling out their phones, but the screens stayed dark. A few tried to turn on flashlights and point them up, but the lights just kept drifting slowly overhead. The whirring grew a little louder, but still no changes in tone. Clara called me from inside the house after about 20 minutes. She sounded shaky, saying the entire town was dark, the power grid down, and the noise was everywhere. She asked if I wanted her to come outside. I told her no, to stay put, but I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just wanted to keep an eye on whatever this was. Scout wouldn't stop pacing now, his head constantly flicking from one side to the other, eyes locked on the sky. Then, as the lights passed over the hill and moved out of sight, the humming sound suddenly stopped. Just like that. No fade, no ramp down. Silence again. And then the power blinked back on. Slow and uneven at first, like someone flipping a switch on and off. Streetlights flickered on, house lights came back, and phones suddenly buzzed alive with notifications and calls. I went back inside and sat down, still uneasy. I checked the news online once the signal came back. There were reports from other small towns nearby about the same blackout and the strange noise. Some mentioned seeing odd lights, but nobody had a clear explanation. The next day, a crew showed up on the hill. They said they were investigating a problem with the power grid, but didn't mention the lights or the noise. I tried asking around, but everyone who saw it seemed reluctant to talk much, like they were waiting for something or didn't want to draw attention. Scout kept staring at the sky for days afterward. I haven't seen those lights since, and the whirring hasn't come back. But sometimes, when it's quiet at night and the wind's just right, I swear I hear it again. A soft, steady hum like metal grinding in the distance. I've been hiking for years, mostly solo, but a few months ago I was out with my friend Jamie. He's been into hiking longer than me, always dragging me to these tougher trails around the Cascades. We decided to hit up a section of the Tolt Pipeline Trail near Carnation, Washington. It's not super technical, but it's got some tricky parts where the forest gets thick and the paths split. We started out late morning. The sun was breaking through a light morning fog. It was cool, but not cold. Just right for hiking. Jamie brought his dog, a lean black lab mix named Echo. She's well trained, stays close, but always eager to check things out. I had my phone strapped to my arm with a hiking app tracking our route. I'm not the best with maps, so I rely on GPS for most of my hikes. We were chatting, the kind of stuff you say when you're moving through the trees, work stress, dumb jokes, stuff like that. The trail was damp, leaves slick with dew, and the air smelled like wet earth and pine. About 2 hours in, we hit a fork I didn't remember from past trips. Jamie said, "This is new. The trail's been rerouted, I guess." We took the left path, which was narrower, less worn, and after a few minutes, it got a little confusing. The path twisted a lot, and some spots had overgrowth that made it hard to see where we were going. After about 10 minutes, it became clear something was off. We stopped and looked around. No obvious markers, no trail signs, and the path was thinner and less traveled than I'd expect. We kept going, but Echo started acting weird. She was quiet, tense, looking around like she sensed something we didn't. Then the fog started rolling in thicker, low to the ground, swallowing the trees and muffling sound. Our voices sounded distant even when we shouted to each other. We agreed maybe we'd gone too far, so we decided to turn back to the fork. Here's the weird part. When I pulled up my phone, the GPS showed a route straight back, but the path it showed wasn't the one we'd walked. Instead of a twisting, narrow trail, it was a perfectly straight line that cut through the forest. Like someone had drawn a shortcut through solid trees and brush. It didn't match anything we could see on the ground. Jamie looked at me, eyebrows raised. "That can't be right," he said. We figured maybe the GPS was glitching. I double-checked with another app. Same thing. Both showed this straight path. We tried following it anyway, moving through the brush, pushing past branches and shrubs where the trail was supposed to be. We didn't find a path, nothing but thick undergrowth and trees blocking us. After a few minutes, we gave up and backtracked to the fork again, which was still visible through the fog. The whole time, Echo kept staring behind us, her ears twitching, but there was no sound besides the wind and the occasional bird. We tried calling out, but only the fog answered. Once we got back on the original fork and into clearer air, the GPS started behaving normally again. It showed the real trail as it was, curving gently through the trees. The weird straight line vanished completely. We kept hiking and eventually made it out, but the experience stayed with me. I kept replaying it in my head. The sudden fog, the wrong path on the GPS, Echo's strange behavior. The day after, I checked online forums and hiking groups to see if anyone else reported trail changes or odd conditions that day. Nothing. The trail was listed as unchanged for months. I haven't gone back since, not with Jamie or Echo. I still hike other spots, but that day feels like a glitch I can't explain. A moment where the forest seemed to shift and the path I thought I knew disappeared for a while. The dash cam had been on for the whole drive, just like always. I didn't usually bother watching the footage later, but that night I decided to check it out. Something about the drive felt off, like my brain was trying to catch on to something I'd missed while I was on the road. I wish I hadn't looked. I live in a small town in northern Idaho, pretty quiet most of the time. That night, I was driving home from a late shift at the mill. It was just past midnight, and the highway was mostly empty, one of those two-lane stretches surrounded by tall pine trees that disappear into the dark sky. The weather was clear, dry, but cold enough that my breath was still fogging the car windows if I breathed out too hard. The dashcam caught everything. The slow rhythm of my taillights fading behind me, the scattered glimmers from distant cabins, the way the road curved up and down through the hills. I noticed something just a few minutes in, headlights behind me, way too close for comfort. I'm not one to speed, especially at night, so it stood out that this car was tailing me tight. No passing, no flash of high beams, just steady, following. I thought maybe it was someone from work or a neighbor taking a shortcut. I wasn't worried at first. The headlights stayed about 2 car lengths behind, just riding the curve with me. Then I slowed down a little, and the car slowed too, like it was matching my pace on purpose. I pulled off at a rest stop up ahead. The headlights kept on, but the car didn't stop. It just sat there in the dark behind me on the highway. Engine off, no movement, nothing. The rest stop was empty, dead quiet except for a faint rustle of wind through the trees. I thought about calling someone, but my phone was sitting on the passenger seat, barely half a bar. I didn't want to overthink it. After a couple of minutes, I got back on the road, easing back onto the highway. The car behind me started moving again, headlights glowing steady in my rearview mirror. We were back on that lonely stretch, the road winding and disappearing into the night. Then it happened. The headlights, which had been fixed on my tail for maybe 5 minutes, suddenly shifted upward, like straight up. The beams flickered and stretched in a vertical line, almost like headlights on a tilt, moving skyward. It was so slow and smooth it didn't look mechanical, more like something floating. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light or some reflection off the trees. But the dashcam footage didn't lie. The headlights lifted up off the road, rising until they were just a small glow against the stars. Then, just like that, they vanished. No fade, no flicker, no headlights retreating back down, just gone. For the rest of the footage, there was nothing behind me. No other cars, no lights, no sounds. I rewound it and watched that part again, frame by frame. It was real, something I could not explain. I kept trying to think of something normal, a helicopter landing, a drone, some military test, but nothing fit. No noise, no flashing lights, no radio chatter on my scanner app. I told my buddy Will about it a few days later when we met for beers. He laughed it off, said maybe I was overtired or dreaming it. But I don't know. I've checked the dash cam a dozen times since, and every time the headlights are there, rising slowly like they were climbing a ladder to the sky. What freaks me out most is how normal the rest of the drive looks. The trees, the road, the stars. It's like the world was perfectly fine, except for that one impossible moment just behind me. I'm not sure why I didn't pull over that night or call the cops, but honestly, part of me was frozen, like my brain didn't want to see what was happening. It felt off, like being watched by something calm but utterly unhuman. I've driven that stretch since, at different times, and never seen anything like it again. The road is just the road, quiet, dark, nothing out of place. Still, sometimes when I drive at night and check my rearview mirror, I half expect to see those headlights creeping up behind me again. But they never show. And the footage, it's still there, stored on my laptop. Proof of a moment I can't explain, but can't unsee. I was working the night shift at the East Point Lighthouse that summer. I'm not talking about some automated setup, those newfangled things where you just check in once in a while. This was the real deal. Me, the foghorn, and that ancient rotating beam slicing through the coastal fog like clockwork. The fog was thick that week, heavy enough to make the whole island feel like a ghost town. I'd been keeping the light running for about 3 months. Quiet work, mostly. Nothing much happened out here besides the occasional fishing boat or the crows screaming from the cliffs. The island's small, barely a mile across, and at night the fog closed in tight. Usually the beam cut through just enough to catch the tops of waves or a distant buoy. But that night, something was different. I was about 2 hours into my shift, sitting by the control panel with my dog, Juno, a scruffy mutt with a nose for trouble. She was snoozing at my feet after the only other living thing around, besides the seagulls and the fog. I was scanning the horizon through the glass window when the beam flicked on and caught something strange just beyond the fog line. At first, I thought it was a boat. That's what you expect. But it didn't move, not at all. It was just there, hovering maybe a quarter mile out, like some dark shape, holding steady in the thick white. The beam swept over it again and again, maybe every 20 seconds, and each time the thing stayed exactly where it was. No blinking lights, no navigation signals, just solid and silent. I tried to call it in on the radio, but the Coast Guard was out of range. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal to check the weather radar or maybe call someone, but nothing. No bars, just dead silence. Juno perked up, ears twitching, growling low and staring out the window with me. That's when I noticed the silence. No waves breaking, no wind, no seagulls. Just dead quiet around that object. Even the fog seemed to hold back. I tried to get a better look with binoculars, but it was like the fog around the shape was thicker, almost deliberately hiding it. When I pressed my face to the glass, all I saw was this black silhouette, perfectly still, no reflection or anything. I went back to the control panel and double-checked the lamp's mechanism. No faults, everything running smooth. The beam was rotating steady every 10 seconds. But the thing stayed frozen in the same spot, always popping out as the light spun around. After a while, I started to feel this weird feeling like I was being watched. Not just by whatever was out there, but from the whole island, like the fog itself was watching me. Juno stayed close, growling low but not barking. I tried to shake it off. Figured maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks in the dark. But the thing kept showing up every time the beam swung near it. I even tried turning the light off for a minute, just to see if it would move or disappear. Nothing. When I turned the lamp back on, it was exactly where it had been. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside onto the balcony. The fog was so thick I couldn't see the water at all. I listened for any sound, but all I heard was the soft clink of the lighthouse machinery and Juno whining softly behind me. The object didn't appear anywhere near the shore, just hanging right there beyond the fog line, almost like it was waiting for something. I couldn't tell its shape clearly, just a dark mass that didn't reflect any light, and didn't even seem to disturb the fog. I went back inside and sat at the radio again, trying every frequency. Static was all I got. Then, out of nowhere, the radio crackled for a second. A faint voice, almost like a whisper, but it vanished before I could make out any words. Juno jumped and barked, running to the door. I opened it, but the fog was thick and still no sign of anything except silence. I stayed up the rest of the night watching that spot. The beam kept rotating, slicing through the fog every 10 seconds, and the shape was still there, never moving, never blinking. At dawn, the fog started to lift. The object slowly faded from view and then disappeared completely. I checked the Coast Guard the next day, but there were no reports of any vessels or aircraft in the area. Satellite images showed nothing unusual either, just a blank patch of sea. Since then, I've kept an eye out every night. Sometimes I think I see a shadow far out there, but it's never the same. And Juno? She never really liked the nights when the fog rolls in thick. She stays close to me, watching the window, her growl quiet but steady. I don't know what I saw. I just know it wasn't any boat or plane I've ever seen, and it sure wasn't natural. It was like something waiting just beyond the edge of the world where the light can't reach. I worked the night shift at a small grocery store on the edge of town, the kind of place that sees more shadows than customers after 11 p.m. My name's Jesse, and I'd been pulling these late shifts for about 6 months when the weird stuff started. I don't usually believe in anything out of the ordinary, no ghosts, no aliens, no anything, but that night made me rethink some of it. The store's parking lot was big, but mostly empty overnight. It had maybe 20 spots, a few streetlights that flickered sometimes, and a chain link fence separating us from an abandoned lot next door. Usually the only thing out there were stray cats or the occasional drifter. I'd clock in around 10 p.m., do my rounds stocking shelves, check the cameras, and just wait for morning. The silence was thick, but it kept me company. It was a Tuesday, late October, and the air was sharp and cold, dry enough to make your breath fog up when you stepped outside. I was finishing my break around midnight when I looked out the front window and saw something that didn't make sense. There was a figure standing by the edge of the parking lot near the fence. Just standing, not moving at all. At first, I thought maybe someone was messing around, waiting for a friend, or just hanging out, but something was off. The person wasn't shifting weight, scratching their head, or even looking around, just frozen, like they were carved from stone. I squinted, trying to make out details. They were tall, wearing dark clothes that blended into the night, and their face was hidden under a hood. No car nearby, no backpack, nothing that would suggest they were just waiting. I blinked and looked away for a second, then back. The figure was still there, exactly the same. I called security on the store's radio, not because I was scared, just routine. "Hey, can you check the parking lot? There's someone standing by the fence." The guy on the other end, Mike, said he'd swing by in a few minutes. I kept watching, eyes glued to that corner, waiting. Minutes passed. The figure didn't move an inch. The figure didn't move in. No blinking, no shifting, no sign they noticed me watching. The strangest part was the feeling creeping over me. A cold, heavy pressure in the air like the world had dropped a degree or two. It wasn't just the temperature, it was something else. Like the night had thickened around that figure. Mike arrived in the security car, headlights sweeping across the lot. I thought maybe the figure would run or at least move, but they stayed perfectly still, like a statue. Mike stopped the car and got out, radioing back to me. "No one here," he said, voice confused. He looked right at the spot where I'd seen the figure, but found nothing. I told him I was looking right at them, but when I glanced back through the window, they were gone. I was sure of it. One moment frozen in place, and the next, nothing. The weird thing was how fast it happened, like the figure just vanished, melted into the dark. I stepped outside to look, but there was no sign anyone had been there. No footprints, no trash, nothing. Mike shrugged it off and said maybe it was a trick of the light or my imagination. I didn't argue. We both went back to our rounds, but I kept glancing out the window. That's when I started noticing other odd things. The security cameras covering the lot didn't show the figure at all. Not a single frame with someone standing by the fence. I asked Mike if the cameras were working properly, and he said yes. Footage from before and after showed the empty lot. I rewound and watched carefully. No flicker, no glitch, just blank asphalt and shadow. I thought maybe I'd been seeing things after a long shift, so the next night I stayed extra alert. Around the same time, midnight-ish, I caught the figure again. Same spot, same stillness. It didn't even blink. I called security again. Mike was late this time, but promised to be there soon. I kept my phone ready, telling myself I was just overthinking it. This time, when Mike's car pulled in, the figure didn't vanish. They disappeared the moment Mike stepped out and called to me over the radio. That part got me. I wasn't imagining it. The figure stayed there, unmoving, for hours before disappearing in the instant help arrived. The nights after that got harder. I'd see the figure again and again. Always the same place, always standing perfectly still, no signs of breathing or blinking. Sometimes, the light from the street lamps hit them weird, like their edges were too sharp, or their shadow didn't match their shape. I'd catch a glimpse of something flickering just at the edge of my vision, but when I looked directly, nothing was there. The strange pressure in the air came back too, heavier every time. One night, Pruitt, the store manager, came in for a late inventory check. I told him about it. He laughed and said maybe I was seeing one of the old mannequins from the seasonal displays. But I knew it wasn't. Mannequins don't stand outside a fenced parking lot, perfectly still for hours. And they definitely don't disappear when someone comes near. Eventually, the figure stopped showing up as often, but the feeling stayed. I started locking all the doors early, double-checking the windows, and making sure Poppy, my dog, was inside before I left. Once, when I was leaving after a shift, I thought I saw a shadow flicker just behind me in the rearview mirror. I looked back. Empty lot. That night shift, that figure, and the way it just vanished, none of it makes sense to me. I don't know what it was or why it was there. Just a still shape in the dark, watching or maybe waiting for something I couldn't see. I was out on the water just before dawn when I first noticed the compass acting up. My name's Eli, and I've been fishing these parts of the coast near Cape Falcon, Oregon, for years. It's a quiet stretch, mostly small coves and rocky shorelines. I know every nook and cranny, or at least I thought I did. That morning started like any other. I had my old aluminum boat, the Seafarer, loaded with gear and fresh bait. The sky was still a dull gray, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath before sunrise. I set out from the dock around 5 a.m. with my dog Scout curled up on the seat behind me. Scout's a big mutt, part lab, part something wild, and he's been my fishing buddy for the last 3 years. The plan was to hit a small cove I'd been curious about but hadn't fished in a while. It's tucked behind a bluff that blocks the wind, and normally the water there's calm, perfect for setting traps. I'd never noticed anything unusual about the place before. As I approached the cove, I glanced down at the compass mounted near the helm. It was spinning like crazy, the needle darting around the dial instead of settling north. That caught me off guard. I've used that compass on this boat for years, and it's reliable as hell. I thought maybe it was a fluke, so I shook it a little, hoping it would settle. No luck. The needle just kept jerking wildly. Scout noticed too. He lifted his head, ears twitching, staring at the water. The weird thing is, the cove should be free from magnetic interference. The rocks are granite, which is non-magnetic, and there's no power lines or anything nearby that could cause this. The GPS was working fine, showing my position perfectly, but the compass was useless. I tried steering away from the cove, but every time I got close, the compass would freak out again. It wasn't just a brief glitch, it was consistent. That got me uneasy, but I figured maybe the compass was dying. I've been meaning to replace it, but money's tight. I kept fishing, keeping an eye on the compass, and Scout stayed quiet, sitting next to me like he was waiting for something. Later that morning, while I was checking my traps near the cove's edge, I noticed something else. The water was eerily still. No birds, no fish splashing, no wind moving the trees on the bluff. It was like the cove had its own bubble of silence. I called Scout over, but he was frozen, staring out over the water toward the opposite shore, his hackles raised. I followed his gaze and saw a shape standing at the far edge of the cove near a cluster of driftwood. It was a man, I think. Tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket and hat. The thing was, he wasn't moving, not even breathing, just standing there, staring back at me. I blinked and looked again, but the figure was gone. No footsteps in the sand, no sign he'd been there. Scout growled low and wouldn't come closer to that side of the cove. That afternoon, I talked to Tom, a fellow fisherman I know who's been around longer than anyone. I mentioned the compass and the figure. Tom frowned and told me about the cove's old stories, how some people said it was cursed, or that strange things happened there at night, but he never believed it. I was skeptical too. I'm not one for ghost stories or weird crap. But the compass kept spinning whenever I went near the cove, and Scout acted jumpy every time. One evening, I decided to wait it out. I stayed on the boat after dark, sitting under the faint glow of a lantern, watching the water. About 10 p.m., the wind died completely, and the fog started rolling in low, swallowing the cove. Then the compass needle started spinning again. Slowly at first, then faster. I heard faint sounds too, like tapping on the hull, soft and rhythmic. Scout perked up and growled, but I couldn't see anything through the fog. I shouted out, but no response. The tapping stopped. Suddenly, the compass stopped spinning and pointed steady north. I looked toward the far side of the cove where the fog was thickest. For a moment, I thought I saw a dim light moving under the water, just beneath the surface, like a glow that wasn't from any boat or buoy. Scout whimpered and crawled into my lap. I didn't stay long after that. The air felt heavy, like something was watching from beneath the waves. The next morning, I found strange marks on the boat's hull. Long, thin scratches like claws, but there was no sign of damage from rocks or anything normal. I showed Tom, and he shook his head. I don't know, Eli. That place, it's always been weird. After that, I avoided the cove as much as I could, sticking to spots where the compass worked right and the water sounded alive. But sometimes, when I'm out on the open water at night, I catch myself glancing back toward that cove, because I know something's there, something that doesn't belong, something I don't understand. The blackout started just after 8 p.m., right when the city was settling into its usual evening rhythm. I was sitting in my apartment in the middle of Redford Heights, a pretty typical neighborhood with those old brick buildings and narrow streets, when everything suddenly went dark. No warning, no flicker, just total silence, except for the hum of the city stopping. I live alone with my dog, a small terrier mix named Poppy. She's pretty skittish about storms and loud noises, but this was different. At first, she froze, ears pricked up and staring at the window. The streetlights were out, the neon signs dark, and even the usual distant sounds of traffic just disappeared. I grabbed my phone to check for any news, but realized the whole building's power was out. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal. It felt like the entire city had just hit pause. I decided to open the window a crack, hoping to catch any news from neighbors or maybe see emergency vehicles. The air was cooler than usual, a little humid and strangely still. Usually at this time you'd hear sirens, car horns, or at least people talking, but now everything was just quiet. About 15 minutes in, the first tapping started. I was leaning against the window frame when I heard it. Soft, rhythmic, like fingers gently drumming on glass. At first, I thought it was Poppy scratching at the window from inside, but she was still on the floor, staring wide-eyed. The tapping came again. 3 quick taps, pause, then 3 more. It was coming from outside. I looked down. The street was empty. Not a soul in sight. No figures, no shadows, nothing moving in the dim outlines of parked cars and closed storefronts. The tapping continued, steady and low, but not close enough to be right at my window. I checked the other windows in the apartment. None of them showed anyone near. I shouted down to the street, just in case, but only my voice echoed back. Then I remembered the blackout wasn't just here. I called my friend Lila on my landline phone. Surprisingly, it worked. She was in her apartment a few blocks away and told me the same thing. The power went out citywide, and people were hearing tapping on their windows, all in the same pattern. I asked if she saw anyone, and she said no one was outside, just like me. Over the next hour, the tapping didn't stop. It was always the same pattern, like some strange Morse code. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. Sometimes it felt like it was coming from the apartment next door or across the hall, but when I peeked out, nothing was there. Poppy stayed glued to me. her body stiff and eyes darting toward the windows every time the tapping came. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was some prank or an animal, but nothing made sense. No raccoon or bird could tap that precise pattern, and the stillness outside made it feel like the city was holding its breath. At one point, I thought I heard voices whispering faintly, but when I pressed my ear to the glass, it was just silence. The power finally came back around 11 p.m., but the moment the lights flickered on, the tapping stopped completely. I went downstairs to check the street. Not a single person was out there, and no signs of anyone trying to mess with windows or anything. Even stranger, a few neighbors told me they felt like they were being watched during the blackout, like someone or something was just outside, waiting. Poppy hasn't been the same since. She won't go near the windows at night, and I keep the curtains closed tighter than before. I can't explain what that tapping was. Everyone I talked to had the same experience. Nobody saw anyone or anything, but the tapping was real, and somehow it was happening everywhere at once. The city was dark, quiet, and just out of reach of whatever was tapping on the glass. I woke up because my tent zipper was moving, not from the outside like you'd expect, but from the inside. It sounded like the slider was being pulled down, slow and deliberate. I sat straight up, heart pounding, but when I looked toward the opening, the zipper was already halfway down. The night air was cool, crisp, the kind of chill you get in the Cascades early fall, and a faint rustling came from outside. My name's Jesse. I'd gone camping alone near Mount Hood at wanting to get away from everything for a few days. No cell signal, no distractions, just me, my gear, and my dog, Luna, a scrappy border collie mix with a keen sense of alertness. I was about a mile off the main trail in a small clearing surrounded by firs and alders. That night, I had fallen asleep early, tired from the hike. Luna was curled up at my feet. I never expected to wake up to the tent zipper moving like that. I grabbed my flashlight from the side pocket and flicked it on. The beam caught the edge of the tent door, still open about halfway, but the flap wasn't moving anymore. I scanned outside, shining the light into the woods. Nothing. No movement. Just shadows stretching between the trees. I called Luna's name softly. She was right there beside me, ears perked but calm. I patted her and tried to convince myself it was just the wind messing with the zipper. But the air was still. No breeze that night. Then I noticed something through the tent window, a small patch of grass just a few feet away. It was scorched, perfectly round, about the size of a dinner plate, like someone had pressed a hot iron to it. The burned grass didn't smell like a campfire or cigarette. It had a strange, almost chemical scent, sharp and faintly metallic. I felt a weird pull in my chest, like a warning, but I didn't want to freak myself out. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight and unzipped the tent the rest of the way. Luna got up and immediately went to the scorched spot, sniffing it like it was something new and important. I stepped outside and looked around. The clearing was quiet, nothing out of place except that patch of grass. My fire pit was cold and untouched. My gear was where I left it. No footprints or signs of anyone else being there. I checked my watch. It was 2:17 a.m. I had no idea how long the zipper had been moving before I woke up. Luna stayed fixated on that burned patch. She didn't bark or growl, just stared, tail still. I walked around the clearing, shining the light between the trees. Nothing unusual, just the forest and the quiet. But then I realized the silence was too complete. No crickets, no wind, no distant owls. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. I zipped the tent back up, locking it from the inside, and tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. Luna settled back down beside me, still alert. I lay there, flashlight off, eyes wide open. I couldn't sleep after that. Later, when dawn came, I found the scorched patch hadn't changed. It wasn't spreading or fading. I poked at it carefully with a stick. The ground underneath was warm but not hot, like it had cooled down recently. I packed up early that morning. Luna was quiet on the hike back to the trailhead, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following us. Nothing ever did. Since then, I've camped in plenty of remote spots, but I haven't seen anything like that night again. The scorched grass patch was the only trace of whatever happened. No footsteps, no damage, just that weird, round burn right outside my tent. It was the second week of January, and I was on the night shift at Pine Row Industrial. That's a cluster of old warehouses about 15 miles outside Duluth, mostly used for seasonal storage and some light manufacturing. I worked security there 3 nights a week, mostly watching cameras and walking the perimeter. Easy job, boring job, paid better than you'd expect. That particular night, it was around 2:30 a.m. Cold as hell, -15 with wind chill. Snow was packed hard from a storm 2 days earlier, and the field behind the northern fence had frozen over solid. That field runs about 400 yards long, surrounded by a chain link fence with nothing but brush and some rusted out machinery beyond it. No lights, no paths, just dead space. We had a decent setup in the office. 12 monitors, half showing normal camera feeds, the others showing infrared, mostly for wildlife or checking heat loss near the loading bays. There's a small electric heater under the desk, and I remember I was sitting there eating one of those vending machine cinnamon rolls, half stale, watching the feed cycle through. Everything was dead quiet, like it always was. A few deer had come through earlier around midnight. Nothing unusual. I was flipping back and forth between cams when something on the north infrared feed caught my eye. It was movement. 3 heat signatures coming from the tree line beyond the fence. They were humanoid in shape, no question. Tall, upright, walking slowly but not stumbling. That field's not easy to cross, it's uneven and icy, but they moved like it was nothing. No hesitation, no slipping, just steady steps across the frozen ground. The first thing I did was check the matching regular camera feed. Nothing. The area was well lit by moonlight, so I should have seen something. Shadows, movement, even faint outlines. But it was empty. Just an open white field. Back to infrared, still there. 3 figures, spaced about 6 feet apart, no visible gear, no flashlights, no reflective clothing. The thermal showed them bright white against the black cold around them. Whatever they were warm, really warm. I zoomed in with the PTZ on that camera, got a closer look. The shapes didn't look bundled up. No puffy coats, no visible hats, nothing that made sense for that kind of weather. Just tall, smooth outlines. The shoulders didn't move much when they walked, kind of stiff, and their heads were, I don't know, a little too round. No detail, but they didn't look right. I radioed Mike, the guy on patrol. He was in the east building doing rounds. I asked him to come back to the office, said there was something weird on camera 3. He took his time, which wasn't unusual. Maybe 5 or 6 minutes later, he walked in, stomping the snow off his boots and asking what was up. By then, the figures were halfway across the field, maybe 100 yards from the fence. I pointed to the screen. They've been walking since 2:33, I said. Check this out. He watched for a second, then asked where they were. North fence. Right there. Yeah, but where are they? He thought I was showing him a recording. He didn't realize it was live. I toggled the split screen, infrared on the left, regular feed on the right, side by side. Clear as day. Nothing on the right, 3 heat signatures on the left. Mike just stood there for a second, staring. Then he leaned in and said, "That's not possible." I told him I'd checked the thermal calibrations earlier that night, and everything was normal. Plus, we'd seen deer just fine on both feeds a few hours earlier. We watched together, saying nothing, as the figures kept moving. They didn't slow down or look around, just a slow, steady pace toward the fence line. I checked the fence cam, the one right above that section, and saw no movement, but the infrared still showed them coming, getting closer. I picked up the phone and called our supervisor, Paul. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail saying we had potential trespassers and that something wasn't lining up. Then I called the local non-emergency dispatch and asked if anyone had reported people on the property. Nothing. It was 2:44 a.m. when the first figure reached the fence. On the regular camera, nothing changed. Just snow and brush and dark. On the infrared, the heat shape stopped directly in front of the chain link. The other 2 halted a second later, each about 6 feet behind the one in front. They stood there, no movement, no shifting weight, just still. Mike whispered something I didn't catch. I zoomed in again. No detail, just white silhouettes. But something strange happened when the front one got close to the fence. The chain link warmed up. I mean that literally. The metal started glowing faint gray on the infrared, like it was heating up where the shape stood. Then slowly, that warmth began to spread sideways, out across the horizontal length of the fence, like whatever it was had raised the temperature of the metal just by being near it. But the regular camera still showed nothing. Fence looked the same. No shadows, no distortion. At 2:47 a.m., the second figure stepped forward. The first one didn't move, but now two shapes were at the fence, standing shoulder to shoulder. Same effect. The metal directly in front of the second one began to heat up. Slowly, evenly, like it was being warmed from within. No fire, no melting, just a temperature shift. We both backed away from the monitor at the same time. Then the third one started to walk again, except not toward the fence. It moved along the inside perimeter, following the fence line west. The other two stayed put, facing forward. We switched cameras to follow the third one as it walked. It kept going along the fence line for about 60 yards, then stopped in front of another gate, a maintenance access point we rarely used. It stood there like it was waiting. Back on the original camera, the first two were still at the main fence, still not moving. Mike asked if he should go check it out in person. I told him no. I don't know why, I just felt like that was a bad idea. We both stood there for a while, just watching. At 2:53 a.m., all three figures turned at once, just pivoted away from the fence and started walking back toward the tree line. No rush, same steady pace, no looking back. Within 5 minutes, they were out of range. The fence cooled down behind them, slowly, naturally, like whatever was warming it had left. We rewound the footage, recorded the screen, saved the clips. At 3:08, I tried calling Paul again. This time he picked up. I told him what we saw, told him we had it on video. He said to send it to his email and that he'd check it in the morning. The next night, the footage was gone. Not corrupted, just not there. The file was missing. We checked the timestamp folder, the backup drive, everything. Nothing. Every other hour of footage was intact. Just that window between 2:30 and 3:10 a.m. was gone. Mike and I didn't talk much about it after that. He ended up switching to days 3 weeks later. I stayed on nights. I still check that fence every shift. But I've never seen those shapes again. I was driving home late one night after a long day at the mill. The highway was one of those stretches that cuts through nothing but forest for miles. Nothing but pine trees and darkness on both sides. I was tired, but the road was empty and smooth, so I figured I'd just push through and get home quicker. My name's Ben, by the way. I live out near Timber Ridge, Oregon, a small logging town where everyone knows each other, or at least knows of each other. The highway out there doesn't get much traffic, especially past 10 p.m. I was about 20 miles out of town when the radio suddenly cut out. Just popped off, like someone hit the off button. Static and then silence. Weird, since I was listening to a late-night country station and I'd had the dial set fine for the whole drive. I fiddled with the knobs, tried switching to AM, FM, even the Weather Channel, but nothing. The screen on the radio was dark, no power, no sound. That's when I noticed the shadow. It passed over the car, perfectly round, like a black disc floating above me. The weird part was, the sky was clear, no clouds, no birds, no airplanes or helicopters. Just stars. I blinked, thinking maybe it was my imagination. I pulled off the road at a turnout to check around. No trees or anything tall nearby could have cast it, and I looked up, but the sky was still just stars. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up and got this sinking feeling, like something was watching me. Scout, my dog, who was riding shotgun, suddenly perked up and started growling low in his throat. I stared out the window, trying to see if whatever had cast that shadow was still there, but nothing moved. The only sound was the forest, wind rustling through the pines. Then the radio turned back on by itself. But instead of the country station, there was only static, the kind that seems almost deliberate. Like a message scrambled beyond recognition. I shook my head, told Scout to settle down, and started driving again. But I kept glancing in the rearview mirror and at the sky. For the next few minutes, everything was quiet. But then that same shadow passed over the car again. And the radio cut out again. It happened 3 more times before I got to the edge of town. Each time, the shadow was there, always perfectly round, moving smoothly, like something hovering just above the treetops. The radio would go dead, then come back on to static. When I finally pulled into my driveway, Scout jumped out and bolted inside. I locked the doors and sat for a while, trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. I haven't driven that highway late at night since. It was last October, a little past peak season, but still warm enough in the afternoons to hike without a jacket. Me and Nolan went out to Cranberry Ridge, which is one of those trails nobody really uses except locals or the occasional birdwatcher. No bathrooms, no signs, just a gravel pull-off and a barely maintained path that loops around a few hills. We liked it because it was quiet, and there was a spot near the top where the trees opened up just enough to see the western ridgeline and a bit of the valley. We took his dog, Poppy. She's a wiry little terrier mix with one bad ear and way too much energy. Nolan kept her leash looped around his pack, but let her run ahead most of the time. We didn't expect to see anybody else out there. It was about 3:30 when we started. Sun was low, but not close to setting. The air was still, just cool enough to make you keep moving. I remember Poppy darting around like she was on a mission, nose down, tail up, constantly circling back to make sure we were still coming. Nolan had one of those little flasks in his jacket, and we passed it back and forth as we hiked. Just a lazy, normal afternoon. We made it to that overlook spot around 5. Sun was hitting the far ridge just right, all golden on the tops of the trees. We sat on this big flat rock and didn't talk much. I pulled out some trail mix. Nolan lit a cigarette. Poppy chased something in the brush and came back with a burr stuck to her face. It was him that noticed it first, the thing in the trees. He was mid-sentence, talking about some argument he'd had with his sister, and just kind of trailed off. I looked over and saw him squinting at something above the tree line to our left, about 100 yards off. He didn't say anything at first, just pointed. I followed his finger and saw what looked like, I don't know, like a mirror. It was up high, way higher than any branch should have been able to hold anything that size. Just this strange, roundish, reflective thing, like a warped sheet of chrome hovering way up in the canopy. Not moving, just sitting there, partially hidden between the upper branches. It was maybe the size of a compact car. No real shape I could describe, just kind of a smooth blob. But it caught the sunlight in a way that made it flicker, almost like it was rippling, even though there was no wind. At first I thought maybe it was a weather balloon or some kind of mylar debris, but it wasn't drifting, it was dead still, and too high up to be stuck on anything I could see. There were no birds near it, which I noticed without meaning to. The whole section of trees just felt still, like the air around it wasn't part of the rest of the forest. Nolan pulled out his phone to zoom in, but he couldn't get a clear shot through the branches. The glare made it impossible to focus. We stood there watching it for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, just trying to figure out what we were looking at. Then Poppy started barking. Not her usual yappy bark. It was deeper, more aggressive. She was facing the direction of the object, low to the ground, tail rigid. When we tried to calm her, she wouldn't take her eyes off it. I don't know why we didn't go closer. I think both of us had that same weird internal hesitation, like it wasn't a good idea. I remember Nolan saying, "Let's come back tomorrow with binoculars." And that was it. We left. Back at the truck, we talked it through like two kids convincing each other a haunted house wasn't real. Could have been trash, could have been glare, maybe something from a drone or one of those temporary weather stations. But I know what I saw. That thing was hovering, and it wasn't made of anything I recognized. We came back the next day, earlier this time around noon, with Nolan's binoculars and my old DSLR. I brought a zoom lens. Poppy was in the back seat, whining and pacing even before we got out. When we got to the overlook, I didn't recognize it at first. The trees on that side were different, at least 30 of them, all in the direction we'd seen the object, were bare, totally stripped of leaves like it was January, and not just dropped leaves either. The branches looked dry and brittle like they'd been hit with frost or fire, but there were no scorch marks, no blackening, just dead. It was silent again. No birds, not even bugs. Nolan set up the binoculars and scanned the treetops. I took a few photos, but there was nothing there anymore. No reflection, no shape, just empty space where we'd seen it. We walked a little closer this time, maybe 50 yards into the dead patch. The ground felt weird. Not soft, but kind of loose, like the soil had been stirred up and packed back down. The trees creaked in the wind even though the rest of the forest was still. I remember touching one of the trunks and feeling this odd vibration, faint but steady, like holding your hand near a transformer. I didn't say anything. I figured I was imagining it. Nolan kept checking the binoculars. At one point, he stopped and looked at me and said, "The tops are all sheared off." I didn't know what he meant, so he handed me the binocs. When I looked up, I saw it. About 10 or 12 of the trees had missing tops, just blunt, clean breaks where the upper branches should have been. Not jagged like storm damage, not splintered, just smooth, almost like they'd been sliced off and lifted away. We stood there for a while, not really sure what we were supposed to do. There wasn't anything to collect or report. No signs of people, no crash debris. Just this unnatural quiet and the hollow sound of Poppy growling low in her throat. She didn't leave the trailhead when we got back, refused to walk past a certain point on the path. We had to carry her to the truck. Later that night, Nolan texted me that his phone's compass app kept spinning when he stood in that area. He'd tried it while I was taking pictures, just out of curiosity. Didn't mention it at the time because he thought it was a glitch. I tried the same thing a few days later with mine, but the compass just froze completely. Wouldn't update at all. The photos I took came out normal, nothing strange in them. But the colors look off in that section of forest, like the white balance didn't know what to do. Everything's got this washed out gray-blue tint. I showed them to a friend who does photography, and he thought maybe the sensor got confused by the lack of contrast. But the rest of the shots from that day look fine. We haven't been back since. I drive past the trailhead sometimes, but I don't stop. I asked around. Park rangers, a guy who runs a hiking blog, even someone from the local birding club, and none of them knew anything about defoliation in that area. No mention of it in the county records either. Nolan says we should go back with a drone. I keep saying, yeah, maybe, but I never bring it up first, and he hasn't pushed. I think he knows I don't want to. We'd been planning the trip for months. Me and Clara decided to get out of the city for a weekend, just the two of us and her dog, a scrappy little mutt named Rufus. We picked a spot in the San Gabriel Mountains, not too far from Los Angeles, but remote enough to feel like we'd gone somewhere completely different. I don't remember the last time I'd slept outside under actual stars. We got there late Saturday afternoon. The air was dry but cool, the kind of crisp you don't really notice until the sun goes down. We found a clearing about a half-mile off the main trail, set up the tent, and started a small fire. Rufus was buzzing around, sniffing every bush and rock like he was on some grand adventure himself. The first night was uneventful, just the usual crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of something moving in the brush. Nothing out of the ordinary, no weird noises or anything. Clara and I were sharing a bottle of cheap red wine, talking about work and stupid stuff while Rufus lay curled up between us. I remember thinking it was exactly the kind of normal, peaceful weekend I needed. Then, around 10:30 p.m., something caught our attention. I was staring into the fire when Clara grabbed my arm and pointed toward the ridge about 2 miles to the east. There was this bright orange glow, like a fireball falling behind the trees. At first, I thought it was just a plane on fire or maybe a meteorite landing. The glow was moving down the slope really fast, disappearing behind the ridgeline. It wasn't a shooting star or a typical meteor, though. This looked like something much bigger, slower. The light was intense, casting long, sharp shadows across the treetops. Clara and I just sat there, frozen. Rufus growled softly and bristled, staring in the same direction. The fireball didn't come back up or flicker again. After about 5 minutes, everything went dark and quiet. No smoke, no sound of an explosion, nothing. Neither of us said much after that. We tried to shake it off, blaming it on some weird atmospheric thing or a distant wildfire. We turned in early, but neither of us really slept. I kept checking the ridge every hour, but nothing happened. The next morning, the sky was clear and bright, the air smelling of pine and dry earth. We packed up the fire and decided to hike over to the spot where we saw the fireball go down. It was maybe a 3-mile trek from our campsite, up and around some jagged boulders and through thick brush. The whole way, something felt off. Rufus kept looking back over his shoulder, ears pricked, like he knew something was following us but wasn't telling us. I caught Clara glancing around nervously too, her usual easy smile gone. When we reached the ridge's far side, there was no obvious crater or debris, no sign of any crash. But there was this weird circular patch of ground, maybe 15 feet across. The grass and underbrush inside it were completely scorched black, but there was no burnt wood or trees, no smell of smoke lingering. Just a clean, scorched circle on the earth. It looked like someone had taken a giant blowtorch to that spot and nothing else around it. No footprints, no tire tracks, no animal prints. Even Rufus stopped at the edge and wouldn't go in. He growled low and backed away. I walked around it slowly, poking at the ground with a stick. The dirt was dry but smelled faintly metallic, almost like burnt copper or something chemical. I didn't touch it with my hands. Clara was quiet, just staring at the patch like it meant something she couldn't say out loud. We circled the area twice, looking for anything else unusual. Scraps of metal, pieces of plastic, anything that might explain what had caused it. But there was nothing. We took a couple pictures on my phone and headed back, both of us weirdly silent. The hike back felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. Rufus stayed close, sometimes glancing up at the trees like he was waiting for something. That evening, we made a small fire near the tent and tried to relax, but I couldn't stop thinking about the scorched circle. I asked Clara if she felt anything weird when we were out there. She said she did, that the air felt wrong, like it was buzzing quietly, but she couldn't explain it. Before we went to sleep, Rufus wouldn't come into the tent. He sat outside, staring up at the ridge where we'd seen the fireball the night before. His hackles were raised, and he growled low and steady all night. When we woke up Sunday morning, the scorched circle was on my mind all over again. We packed up and started heading back down the mountain, keeping our eyes on the ridge. Driving back through the winding forest roads, I noticed something weird on my phone's compass app. It was spinning slowly, like it was off by a couple degrees, but the GPS worked fine. Clara said her phone showed the same thing. Neither of us could explain it. We got home that afternoon, but the sense of unease didn't leave me for days. Rufus refused to go near the backyard without me, and Clara kept asking me if I thought the fireball was real or just some kind of trick. I've looked online, checked fire reports, meteor sightings, even contacted the ranger station near the area. Nothing about a fireball, no reports of crashes or wildfires at that time. Every time I think about it, I'm stuck on that scorched circle, how clean and unnatural it looked in the middle of all that untouched forest. Something happened there, whatever it was, but there was no wreckage, no smoke, no noise, just a burned patch of earth and a dog who didn't want to get any closer. I don't know what we saw. I don't even know if it was something physical or just some kind of weird light show. But it wasn't a meteor, not like anything I'd ever heard of. And Rufus still won't go near the ridge. I was out for my usual evening run on that Saturday. The neighborhood where I live, Oak Ridge, is quiet around 6:30 p.m., especially on weekends. Houses set back from the road, a few street lights flickering on as the sun started dipping. It was a warm day, maybe 75 degrees or so, humid, but not unbearable. I like that time because it's usually peaceful. No rush hour, no kids screaming, just me and the slow shuffle of my sneakers on the pavement. I was jogging down Elm Street, heading toward the park, when I noticed the black van parked near the old community garden, the one with the cracked windows and the peeling paint. It stood out mostly because it didn't have any plates, no front, no back, just a plain black van sitting there like it had nowhere to go. I slowed down a bit, glanced over at it, but didn't think much of it. Vans without plates show up all the time around here. Sometimes they belong to painters or contractors, but those usually have some kind of company logo. This one was just There. I kept running past it. My headphones were on, but I wasn't really listening to anything. Just the usual playlist on shuffle, some old rock songs. I looked back once as I crossed the street to the park path. The van stayed put. The run was normal after that. No weird noises, no one lurking around. I got home, stretched, drank some water, and that was that. Next morning, Sunday, I went out to grab the paper from the driveway. I noticed that same black van again. It was still parked right where I'd seen it the night before. Only thing was, it was covered in frost. Like the whole windshield and the side windows had this thick white frost crust, and the roof was dusted with it too. I blinked and stepped closer. It didn't make sense. It wasn't even cold overnight. The weather report said it'd been a mild, humid night. The temperature hadn't dropped below 70 degrees. I stood there for a minute, touching the frost with my finger. It felt cold, solid. But when I pulled my hand away, the frost didn't melt. It just stayed frozen, crisp, like it had been there for hours or more. I wondered if maybe it was some kind of prank or leftover from a fog machine or something from a party. But nobody in the neighborhood does stuff like that. I tried to see if anyone was inside. The windows were fogged from the frost, but I could make out shapes, empty seats, some kind of tarp or blanket in the back. No movement. The doors were locked tight. No noise. I decided to call the police, just to report an unregistered vehicle with no plates and the weird frost. The dispatcher said they'd send someone out to check it. I waited around for a while, but no one came by. Later, when I checked again in the afternoon, the van was still there, frost and all. Even the pavement underneath it was dry, no water puddles or anything that might have come from melting ice. I thought maybe the frost would have melted by evening, but when I took a late night walk around 11, it was still there. That's when I started noticing other odd things. First, the streetlights above the van were flickering in a way they hadn't before. Not a steady flicker, but more like a slow pulsing, dimming, and brightening. It was subtle, and I almost convinced myself I was imagining it until I looked up and saw the pattern repeat 3 times in a row. Then it stopped. I was about to turn around when I heard a soft humming. Not loud, more like a distant electrical buzz, almost rhythmic. I scanned the street, trying to find the source, but there was nothing else around. No power lines buzzing, no transformers clicking. The van stayed quiet. Still frost-covered, windows opaque. I got home, locked the door behind me, and kept thinking about it all night. Monday morning, I figured maybe someone came to tow it or the cops took care of it, but no, the van was still there. Frost was gone, though. Just a normal black van now, clean, no plates. That's when I realized something else was off. The grass right next to the van was crushed flat in a perfect rectangle, like the van had parked on the grass, but there were no tire tracks or marks on the pavement near it. It was as if it materialized right there overnight. I told my neighbor Sarah about it when she came out to get her mail. She frowned and said she'd seen the van too, but hadn't paid it much attention. "You sure it wasn't there before?" she asked. "I'm pretty sure. I run past here every day." She shrugged and went inside. The rest of Monday was normal, but I kept stealing glances out my window, half expecting to see that frost again or something stranger. Tuesday morning, I woke up to a knock on the door. It was Officer Ramirez, the local cop I know from around the neighborhood. He asked if I'd noticed the van and if I could describe it. I gave him all the details. The missing plates, the frost that didn't melt, the strange humming and flickering lights at night. He listened, nodding, but his expression stayed serious. "I'll check into it," he said, then left. That night, I went out for another run. The van was gone. The spot where it had been was empty, grass back to normal, no crushed patches. I felt relief, but also a weird hollow in my stomach, like the whole thing was unfinished. I kept running the same route for the next week. No van, no frost, no humming. But one night, about 10 days later, I was heading home and saw a flicker of light from the edge of the park. It was faint, bluish, almost like a reflection on a small lake or puddle, but there was no water there. I stopped, trying to see better, but it disappeared. I checked my watch. It was 11:13 p.m. I walked faster home, heart racing for no reason I could explain. After that, I started noticing other small things. My phone would lose signal near that park, even when it was fine everywhere else. Sometimes I'd hear a low hum that seemed to come from under the ground. Nothing big, Nothing I could prove. I never saw the van again. But sometimes when the streetlights flicker just right, or the air feels a little too cold for no reason, I think about that frost-covered van and wonder what exactly it was doing parked there on that warm summer night with no plates and no driver. I didn't plan on noticing the lawn lights that morning. Usually, I'm half asleep, rushing to get coffee and get my day started before my job at the library kicks in. But that day, when I opened the back door to let Jasper out, something felt off. Jasper, my border collie mix, he's got this rusty brown coat and a white patch on his chest. Not your typical dog, more cautious than friendly with strangers. He stopped dead at the edge of the patio. Usually, he bolts out into the yard the second the door cracks open, circling around, sniffing everything, digging holes where he's not supposed to. But that morning, he just froze, ears flat and tail tucked low. I followed his gaze down the lawn where the pathway lights are set. Those little solar-powered stakes I put in last summer. They're supposed to line the stone walkway from the deck to the garden gate, soft, warm light every night. Except this time, none of them were on, which was weird since it was a bright, cloudless morning. I walked over and checked the bulbs. They weren't broken, not a single crack or sign of damage. The glass was clear, the bulbs looked perfect. I twisted one out to look closer and it was completely fine. No scorch marks, no melted plastic, no burnt smell, nothing. I replaced the bulb, figuring maybe the batteries died or the solar cells were just crap. But as I went from light to light, the same thing happened. Each bulb intact, but totally dead. Jasper stayed close to the porch, refusing to move closer to the path. I tried calling him, but he growled low and backed up a little, looking past me as if something was standing just beyond the garden gate. I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe he smelled a raccoon or a neighborhood cat. But then I noticed how silent it was out there. The usual morning hum of birds and bugs was missing. Not one chirp, no rustling leaves, just this weird, unnatural quiet that sat heavy around the yard. I went back inside to grab my phone and take a picture of the lights, mostly for my landlord, since they weren't working and I wanted a replacement. When I got back out, Jasper was staring harder now, his whole body stiff. I looked around but saw nothing. I figured maybe I was tired or paranoid and decided to go about my day. That evening, I took Jasper for a walk. It was a cool, foggy dusk, perfect for being outside, but with that weird kind of mist that dulls the streetlights. On the way back, I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, standing on her porch, staring at my yard with this uneasy look. She waved when I passed and said, "That light situation out there? Been off all day?" I nodded, feeling awkward. "Yeah, they're just not working and the bulbs aren't even burnt out." She frowned. Funny thing is, my lights did the same a few nights ago, but I just thought it was the storm messing with the wiring. I thanked her and kept walking, but now the quiet was gnawing at me, kept tugging me along, clearly wanting to get inside fast. That night, I checked the lawn lights again. No sign of power, not even a flicker. I tried replacing the batteries, but the new ones didn't help. Jasper refused to go anywhere near the path, sitting by the back door and whining softly if I tried to coax him out. A few days passed, and the bulbs stayed dead. I asked a handyman to look at the wiring. There was none. They're solar-powered, remember? So no electrical faults to find. What bothered me was Jasper. He wouldn't run around or play outside like usual. If I threw his ball near the lights, he'd stare at it but wouldn't chase it. Once he even backed up against the house, teeth bared, growling at nothing. I started noticing small things around the yard too. Little depressions in the grass near the path, perfect circles where nothing grew, like the earth itself had been burned or poisoned, but the soil was dry and warm to the touch. No footprints, no signs of digging, just these round dead spots. One evening, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, watching Jasper sniff around the garden's edge. The fog had rolled in thick again, and the streetlights blurred into orange halos. Suddenly, I heard a faint buzzing sound coming from the direction of the dead spots. It was low, almost like a swarm of insects, but when I looked closer, there was nothing. Jasper's ears perked up, and he stared into the fog, muscles taut. I wanted to get up, but I felt glued to the chair. The buzzing stopped as suddenly as it started. I got up and flicked on the porch light. That's when I noticed the shadows, shapes just outside the yard, shifting slightly in the fog, like dark figures but with no clear outline. I blinked, and they were gone. That night, I barely slept. Jasper stayed close, occasionally letting out low whines toward the windows. The next morning, I decided to take a walk with him in the woods behind the house, hoping the fresh air would shake this feeling. On the trail, the sun was cutting through the trees in thin beams, the woods alive with birdsong and rustling leaves. Jasper was more relaxed, sniffing every tree. But when we got back to the yard, he froze again by the dead spots. I knelt down and touched one of the circles. The grass felt brittle, like it had been dead for weeks, but I'd watered the lawn every day. No explanation. That evening, the same fog rolled in, heavier this time, and the buzzing came back, louder and closer. I swear I could see faint, blinking lights floating just above the dead spots, like fireflies, but too steady and too synchronized. I grabbed Jasper and dragged him inside, locking the doors. Over the next few days, things got stranger. The dead circles grew, slowly spreading along the walkway. Jasper refused to leave the house, whining and pacing. One night, I swear I heard faint tapping on the window near the yard, just a soft rhythm, but when I looked, there was no one. Eventually, I had a friend, Carla, come by. She's not the type to freak out easily. She inspected the dead patches, the lights, even tried to find critters or insects that might explain the buzzing or the dead grass. She found nothing. Maybe it's some kind of mold or fungus, she suggested, but nothing showed up on the soil samples she took. She stayed the night. And when the fog came in again, she saw the blinking lights too. We watched them from the kitchen window. Little clusters of soft white and blue, moving just above the ground, then fading out one by one. Neither of us could explain it. After a week, I replaced the lawn lights with new ones wired to the house power, but they still wouldn't turn on near the dead patches. Lights farther away worked fine. Jasper wouldn't even go near the edge of the yard without me holding him. Eventually, the dead patches stopped growing, and the buzzing disappeared, but the lights on that side of the yard never worked again. I don't know what caused it. I don't know what those lights were or why Jasper was so afraid. I just know that every time I look at the lawn now, I see those dark spots and remember the silence that fell over the yard, the buzzing that wasn't insects, and the way Jasper wouldn't go near it. I keep the porch light on at night now, just in case.